Welcome to the ultimate live stream event. I'm ChatGPT, and I'm thrilled to introduce the powerhouse of commentary, your host for today, the one and only Vegan Power Lab. And joining us in the ring of ideas, we have the phenomenal, the unstoppable, Justin from Debug Your Brain. Get ready for a showdown of epic insights and electrifying discussions. Let's get this show started.
That was pretty good.
That was pretty good, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Hey, Justin. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the stream. I thought it would be a fun introduction to get ChatGPT to introduce us.
Yeah.
I tried a couple of things. I tried to make ChatGPT do it like in a WWE voice in this corner, but they didn't really. Apparently, the capabilities. Yeah, that would have been cool, but the capabilities aren't really that far ahead, apparently. So yeah, still cool introduction. Okay, so Justin, I think most people who are watching us or who will be watching us already know your channel. You're a pretty big staple in the vegan community. You make great videos, and what I do love about your videos is that you also provide these extra tidbits when you do outreach, for example, where you kind of mention what you were thinking and what your intent is in all of this. And I mean, this is just my own introduction towards your channel, which is awesome, by the way, and I really appreciate your channel. I actually have learned a lot from your channel also.
Awesome.
So I thought, I maybe a lot of people have already seen your conversation with Danish. I actually have seen it too. But I thought it would be interesting just to go, maybe really fast, not go too much into details about your journey as a vegan and kind of what got you into being a vegan. And was there an aha moment? How long have you been vegan for? I guess that's my first question. How long have you been vegan for? Is there a particular argument that convinced you to be vegan, or maybe the last argument that you heard? Because
I've been vegan for about 4 years now. I think like a little over 4 years, depending on like how you count when I like officially was vegan. It started with watching a bunch of debate videos. So I'm kind of a debate bro at heart, and I just like to watch debate videos on YouTube, debates about anything, primarily religion, but all sorts of politics and things like that. And I stumbled across some Earthling Ed videos where he was debating veganism. And so, vegan debates, college student, why not? I like all debates. So I clicked on those, started watching them, and I found those debates to be like really compelling. And it was also a subject I hadn't like really been exposed to much. And so it was more interesting than hearing the same regurgitated like atheist debates or political debates or what have you. So I started listening to them, find them really entertaining. And the thing that I noticed about them, the thing that struck me, was that I felt like the intelligence of the person like proffering the argument was much higher than the quality of their arguments. Like if I'm just looking at someone and, just kind of like watching them speak, just how they carry themselves, how they speak, the words they choose, the sort of general reasoning and whatever it is, I feel like I can get a like somewhat good idea of how intelligent that individual is. And so to me, it looked like we had these like medium to high intelligence individuals giving arguments that were like second grade level logic, you know what I mean? And like as most like anti-vegan arguments are. And this is coming from someone who wasn't a vegan or who wasn't a vegan at the time, right? And I'm still looking at these and being like, yo, like you need better than that. You gotta come at Earthling Ed with a better argument than that, right? And so as I watched them, I just started getting exposed to the fact that it didn't really seem like there were many good arguments. And so the more I watched, the more that kind of eroded my confidence, because typically when you see when you see a mismatch like that between like intelligence and the quality of the argument, it tends to mean that someone is like protecting themselves in some way. They're being defensive. And so the question was, well, what are they protecting themselves from? And I think it's pretty obvious that if this is true, then they might have to confront the fact that, they might think something like, I'm a terrible person. I don't typically think in those terms, but at the very least, like I'm doing a horrible thing. I'm doing a terrible thing, or at least I'm doing something that is contradictory to my values. And so that bug got in my ear. You know what I mean? Then I start thinking about that, and I start looking at it from a more like meta psychological perspective, rather than just like, are there good arguments? I'm looking at it more as, am I erecting those sort of defenses against this topic? You know what I mean? And so I think that's
especially,
really, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, especially since you mentioned it with such you said that this person is more intelligent and yet their arguments are not intelligent. I would imagine that you, as a person who probably also wants to be intelligent, like myself also, when you hear somebody who you think is intelligent and kind of go all over the place with arguments, then you're like, why is it that way? So then you start to question it about yourself also, right? So
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that's what was partly effective with Ed's videos is he was going to colleges, and like some of these are like really high level colleges, so you know the people at these colleges are smart on average. This has got to be an intelligent person, you know. So regardless of even how I read the person, I'm looking at these external cues like, oh, this is someone at Harvard or someone at Yale or something like that, you know. And so, you know, all that together started really getting me thinking. And then I also noticed I didn't really have particularly good arguments. I had arguments against veganism, but it didn't seem like those arguments were better than the counter arguments. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I tend to look at it. And at that point, I'm like, damn, maybe I'll have to go vegan. I think the real clinchers for me, though, were like when I was hearing these, like, to some extent, the slavery example, but to a greater extent, actually, the Holocaust example. And it wasn't people saying like, this is a Holocaust. It was when people were actually comparing it to the Holocaust. And that really hit me hard because like once you start thinking of like pigs in gas chambers or like them being moved around in cattle cars, you know, in the same way that Jews were, it really like puts it into perspective for you because there's a couple dots you connect. You're like, well, clearly that's horrible. Like, I know that was horrible to do to people. Why wouldn't it be horrible to do to animals? But the other thing is, again, this more meta-psychological level of, oh, that's right. There were a bunch of humans who were able to do that to humans, and think not only was it like neutral, it was actually a good act. You know what I mean? And so, we're all cut from the same cloth. Our psychology, like the psychology you and I have, isn't psychology that's much different than the people who are Nazis. Maybe not different at all, really. You know, it's pretty similar psychologies. It's just that with, you know, the right sort of social pressures or maybe just like, you know, minor differences in psychology, you can get there. You can get to these atrocious places. And so, you know, someone had made this comment before to me. Maybe it was someone in my family. I don't remember. But they were like, you know, if you were living in Nazi Germany, you know, during the earlier 1900s, like you might have been a Nazi. It's easy for everyone to say like, oh no, I would have never been a Nazi, right? I would have never been against women voting. I would have never been pro-slavery. It's really easy for everyone to say that now in hindsight, except that a ton of people were. Most people, you know, less of the Holocaust, but most people were, you know, or at least didn't care enough to try to stop slavery. And there were plenty of people who didn't want women to have the right to vote, you know? And so it's like, we can all be those people at any point in time. You know, we're not at the end of history. We're not at the end of our moral development. And so those were really powerful for me to look at and then just be like, yeah, I could be the Nazi right now. And I think with animals, we are the Nazis, you know, or the slave owners or whatever atrocious analogy you want to use. And that's why I think those analogies are actually really important. A lot of people like get very offended by them, but I think they're important because they give you that extra punch. And it's like a 1-2 punch. It's a punch of like, this is one of the most horrible things ever. And also good people engaged in these atrocities. The average person was engaging in some of these atrocities, you know? And that's what really kind of pushed me over the edge. Like I was even to the point where I was like, yeah, okay, fair enough. Veganism is a morally superior position to non-veganism. Like that I was convinced of pretty early on. But there's a difference of just being convinced of that and then being pushed to like, oh, I have to go vegan. Because like I'm convinced of the position that like volunteering my time at soup kitchens every Wednesday and Thursday is a morally superior position to me not doing it, right? But I don't feel this like inextricable pull to do that in the same way that I do with veganism, because I just don't see it as the same level of like moral obligation, you know? I don't see it as the same level of atrocity for me to not go to a soup kitchen as to not buy murdered, tortured, sexually exploited animals, you know?
That's very interesting. So for you, it was more of a logical thing that got you into veganism, not necessarily an emotional thing that resonated with you. Interesting. And you also mentioned, I wrote down that you mentioned that you can get to these atrocious places, and I mean, I'm sure maybe we'll touch upon these maybe later on, but I just don't want to let it go and ask you why do you think that we as people get into these atrocious places? Because I have a theory of my own. Because I myself have also been gullible at times. I'm not ashamed to say that I've been gullible. But yeah, why is it that you think that we can easily become, like, let's say if we were born in Nazi Germany, that we could easily become Nazis?
I mean, so there's a lot of answers to this. I don't think there's any one answer that answers the entire question, but I'll give you a couple things. One thing is that we are social animals. We are not primarily truth-seeking animals. We're primarily social animals. Truth-seeking is a good thing to have, and many times it comes in handy, but often whenever we're confronted with like do what the group does or do the thing that's true, it's easier to do what the group does. And so typically the evolutionary explanation for this goes something like, when we lived in small communities, 150 people or less, and we had certain traditions and things that we did, and like whatever. To go against the tribe presented a huge risk, because if you got kicked out of the tribe, you were essentially dead, right? Getting excommunicated at that time was pretty close to a death sentence. It's not like now where if you like get booted out of your tribe, you can just play video games all day, or just move to a different city or whatever. Like, I don't think society would take care of you in the same way in those early days of human evolution. And even if you weren't kicked out of the tribe, you could basically be made a pariah. You know what I mean? Like maybe like technically they fed you and clothed you, but if you didn't get to reproduce, then it's essentially the same as dying in evolutionary terms, right? So your genes are never going to get passed on. So whatever behavior you had, that truth-seeking behavior, isn't going to get passed on in the gene pool. And so the idea is the people had more of an incentive to be socially agreeable than they did to find truth. And so that's definitely one thing. So we just have a very strong social pool to do things. And so if everyone else is doing something, we get sucked in. Another thing is just like this whole in-group, out-group mentality, right? This is something that we're very attuned to. An out-group, like, again, this is, evolutionary psychology is very speculative. I just want to say that. But this is like typically the hypothesis that is like put forward, or at least that I've heard. And so like you imagine like you have a tribe, and then all of a sudden you come upon a neighboring tribe. Well, the neighboring tribe can be very dangerous because they are an X factor. They're an unpredictable variable in your equation now, right? You know that your tribe was doing fine. You know all the people in your tribe. You know their names. You know their customs. You know their values. Boom, now we got this other tribe over here. We've never seen them before. Maybe their values are like anathema to our own. Maybe they have the same values, but they have different epistemology. You know what I mean? Maybe they think like, we should be, maybe they think, that, we should definitely treat everyone who has a disease, but they think that giving you like poison treats a disease, whereas our tribe doesn't think that. And so there's all sorts of like dangers there that like, I think like adds to this like suspicion or potential animosity between outgroups. That's just like one thing, like tribal. But there's other weird things that start to happen. Like there's this thing called pluralistic ignorance, which is sort of interesting. So pluralistic ignorance is like if you imagine you have like a group of, let's say, 100 people or whatever, and everyone thinks that everyone thinks something that they don't. So I'll give you an example. I think they did the studies in kids with college kids and like how much they wanted to drink alcohol. So everyone was under the impression, or when you polled college students, everyone was under the impression that other people were more into binge drinking and drinking a lot of alcohol than they actually were. So if you were to ask each person individually and see how much they wanted to drink, many kids wanted to drink like a little, like maybe a little to like a medium amount or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers. But what people thought was that everyone liked to drink a ton every weekend. And so what this led to was a behavior where everyone goes out every weekend and drinks a ton because everyone thinks everyone else wants to drink a lot of alcohol, even though no individual person wants to, because there's this hidden social information that's driving the behavior. And so I think that can definitely contribute to it, especially when you have like a sort of authoritarian or fascist regime or something backing it, because then what you think is like, oh, everyone else thinks we should be doing this to Jewish people, right? And so you also start to think, well, I can't confide in my neighbor that I think this is messed up, because if I tell them, they're going to tell on me. And so you get these weird like pluralistic ignorance, game theory things that start happening. I think that just let these like atrocities like propagate in weird ways. But that's just like two of like the many things I think that can influence this sort of stuff. And then the thing I always talk about, I should mention this, I think at the psychological level, objectifying or othering other individuals. That's really sort of the root of what lets I think of what lets an individual harm another individual, like in a more direct way, without feeling that empathic response that we typically feel that would make it totally aversive to us. Like if you and me were hanging out, right, and like, you know, you saw someone stab me, you would immediately feel empathy for me, right? You would try to like get that person off of me. You'd probably try to like provide me with some sort of first aid or something like that. But that even at that very individual level can be turned off if you don't see me as an individual, as a someone who has like some inherent moral value, you know. And that's, you know, I just think what happens often with animals, obviously, but it has also happened to humans throughout history as well. Because if you view these individuals for who they are, individuals, then you're going to have that human empathic response that is like, it's beyond logic, right? It is like almost like a knee-jerk reaction you have to seeing another being harmed in some way. So, yeah.
That's a very interesting thing. So I wrote down, by the way, pluralistic ignorance to look more into it. I found that very interesting because I myself have wondered about it, and I wonder about what the source of pluralistic ignorance is. I have noticed that I didn't know that it has a name. But it's interesting. So thank you for that. This is why I love these streams. I get to learn more stuff, and it's you know.
Someone actually pointed this out to me on one of my videos. I was asking a woman, like, what do you think would be hard about it? And she's like, well, all my friends, you know, they wouldn't be accepting of it, and they would think it was weird. And someone pointed out that might be pluralistic ignorance. Like, if you had asked all of her friends, you brought them all in one-on-one, a lot of them probably would have all said, oh, all my other friends would think it's weird. You know what I mean? And so there actually might be that operating even here as far as like a social, you know, a social pressure sort of thing. Whereas if you ask, and that's the thing I have, when I ask people individually, they seem to be down with it. They seem to like get it at a fundamental level, but they're like, but other people are going to think I'm weird. Other people will think I'm a bleeding heart or like illogical or whatever, you know, naive. So.
It sounds like pluralistic ignorance is somewhat of a subset of the need for belonging, right? It's in a sense because people feel the need to belong, and they create these scenarios where they're afraid to stray away from the normal, and they think, well, if this is the normal, I just want to be normal because I want to belong, right? They seem kind of related, if you ask me.
100%. I think in therapy a lot, there's this thing of like where you try to like, you drill down on like what your sort of own neuroses are, and almost everything, it's like all roads lead back to like a need to belong and a need to not feel isolated from others. It's just like everything just funnels back into that in some fundamental emotional need level.
I love to hear that. Are you in therapy? I am also in therapy myself.
Yeah, I do therapy.
I like that. How, if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been doing that for?
Not for a super long time. I only did it recently. I was always pretty skeptical of therapy, and my girlfriend has been trying to like get me to do therapy for a while. She's like, trust me, like I know you think that she's like, I know you think you don't have problems, but you do. Sort of thing, like in the sense of like there's like deeper levels to plumb of your own psychology. You know, even if it's like, you know, even if on the average day, like I feel happy, I'm not super depressed, I'm not super anxious, I'm not any of these things. She's like, it's not just for that. You know what I mean? It's not just for if you have these really sort of intense psychological pathologies or something. It's like, it's just for gaining a better understanding, even and being more like pro-social, I think. How long have I been doing it? Yeah, I don't know, like maybe 6 months or something, I guess. Something like
I mean,
so not a super long time.
I mean, therapy is about knowing yourself. I mean, I did like 6 or 7 years of therapy, so
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, but on and off. You know, you do some therapy, and at some point you realize maybe I need a break, and then you come back, and then it's one of those things that it's basically like a medicine for the mind, and the mind doesn't just work like this. You need back and forth, you need to regurgitate some things, and some things take a long time, especially if there are situations in your life when you had something to deal with that you didn't know how to deal with, and that situation maybe you haven't been presented, or you will never ever be presented with that situation again, so you will never ever understand that feeling again that you got during that situation. So then it's especially hard to tackle that situation, of course, in therapy or whatever, but somehow you do need to tackle it because I mean, as for myself, my problem with therapy, my problem, the reason why I went to therapy was because I don't, maybe that's the reason why most people go to therapy, I don't know. But myself was because I don't know how to deal with emotions, and I had to learn how to deal with them. And, you know, it's very hard to accept negative emotions. I come from a society where my parents have always told me, don't stay in your place, don't cry, don't feel
Yeah.
bad, we have to show a smile, we have to show we're happy and everything. But nobody's like that, right? So in that sense, whenever I found negative emotions that I didn't know how to deal with, I just put them out of sight, out of mind, or bottled them up. And yeah, eventually I started having panic attacks and therapy, and voila, I'm better now.
Nice. That's
So,
awesome. That's a good success story. I think it's interesting what you mentioned too, because I think therapy is so stigmatized.
yeah.
It sounds like where you were from is it's definitely stigmatized in the U.S. Particularly though, I think for men more so than women. Like there's definitely a sort of like suck it up attitude with men, and like, you know, you're weak if you go to therapy, something like that. Just do just do the whole Marcus Aurelius Stoic thing. And, not that there's not a time for Stoicism. I do think Stoicism has its value, but there is this idea that like, yeah, I don't know what people think therapy is exactly, but it's definitely, once you get into it, it's not what I thought it was. And I didn't
It's
even have
interesting, isn't
particularly
it?
like negative connotations of therapy. I was just kind of more neutral
Yeah.
on it. But I know a lot of people are like, no, this is like the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. This is just for like weak people and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know if you found this, but I don't like to say that like X is weak, X is strong, but like I found that if anything is weak, like if we are going to describe something in those terms, it's this walling off of the emotions actually that's weak, because it takes a
100%.
lot of courage and just like mental effort to like move towards those emotions in a real way. I literally just had therapy before I came onto the stream, and I was like, dude, I didn't want to have therapy before I did this, because, and this is something else that people probably don't understand. When you go to the gym and you work out, like you're very tired afterwards and you're sort of
Yeah.
sore the next day. But therapy is a similar thing for your mind and your emotions. If you have like
True.
if you really start drilling down into yourself and who you are and like what your emotions you're feeling that day, it is exhausting. It's like working a muscle, but it's like working your like brain muscles. And you come out of it, and sometimes I come out of it in sort of like a haze almost, like an emotional haze, you know? And so it's funny that you asked me about therapy, because I literally just got done doing therapy. And so, yeah, I think it's really quite a different experience than most people would assume that it is.
Yeah, I think most people see therapy as this place where there's either the people who think that you just talk to somebody and you work it out because you talk it out, right? Like it's like they see the therapist as more of a friend, where, oh, you're just explaining your emotions. Like I have heard the expression where I don't need therapy, I have friends.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it's not that. And or there are these other people who think that you go to therapy, you speak out, and the therapist tells you what to do, which is also not that.
Yep.
Therapy is about knowing yourself. I feel like that's all it is. Like it's about exploring who you are with a professional who can help you explore who you are, right? That's all it is. And in a professional environment where I mean, sure, maybe some friends can help you do that also, but the reality is that with a professional, it's not that they can help you know who you are, but they can also drive you towards the areas where you need to work on who you are, right? It's not just so I'm a big proponent of therapy. Some of my best friends are going to therapy, and I even have friends who don't date anybody who is not in therapy, which is kind of like exclusive, just because they kind of understand the value of therapy and they understand how good it goes. So yeah, nice that you're going.
Yeah, and I just want to say to people a couple of things, because I have noticed that the people I know in my life that have gone to therapy compared to the people that don't, now that I've been in therapy, it is almost create like a bit of a bridge between you, because you start picking up on these, I don't know, like emotional nuances and just different kinds of communication that I just couldn't pick up on before, and I just were totally invisible to me. And it's almost like now when I watch someone who, you know, like who hasn't done much therapy and someone who has, and I watch them have an interaction, I see it on multiple levels. And depending on the level I'm looking at and the kind of conversation it is, if they're just talking about facts or like politics or something like that, I'm like, oh, these are just two smart people talking. But when I'm looking at like the emotional level, or if they're having a more emotional conversation, about something that's like heated, a difficult conversation, it now like starts to look like a college graduate versus a second grader talking. And not even versus, but like, it's just like, they're almost like not even quite talking on the same level, or this person is like, kind of like, yeah, but like kind of like guiding them a bit. And it has opened up this sort of vista to me, this emotional vista, I guess I would say, in watching even other people communicate. And looking back at how I communicated before, like I'm almost like embarrassed sometimes at the way I communicated. Like, oh my God, like I thought that was a good way to communicate. And I even, sorry, I'm going off like too much of a ramble, but
No, you're not.
Like,
Do it.
Is it okay?
Yeah. That's what we're here for, man. There's no set schedule. Everybody's here to watch us talk whatever we want to talk. So I don't know if that's true, by the way.
It's a therapy stream.
It's a therapy stream. Yeah.
I will tie this back into activism, though, I promise. So yeah, just watching those interactions and thinking about my past interactions and being like, some of the things I thought I was doing, like I was like, oh man, I'm crushing this conversation. I'm handling it so well. And I look back now and I'm like, wow, you were missing like 20 layers of like what they were going through, what you were going through. You thought that this is what you were saying, but you were actually just emotionally like blocking yourself off and trying to like steamroll them or actually deflect the conversation or X, Y, whatever, any number of things. And to me, the thing now is that I do bring that to my activism, because I do feel like I can see layers of emotional responses that I just couldn't see before. Like I definitely make it much more of a point now to like validate the other person's experience, even when I disagree with them. Which is something I did bring that up in a somewhat recent video. But even just the way I connect and the way I empathize with them, I tend to see it more from their side. Like I try to remember what it was like when I was not vegan. You know what I mean? And I see like, I feel like I do see the things for what they are, but then I'm also kind of forgiving of them or compassionate towards them. So like when they do a deflection, right? So the first layer is like when they deflect is to recognize that they're deflecting, right? And as you start to do outreach, you recognize these deflections. But the level up after that is to not just be like, oh yeah, fuck you. You think you're going to deflect me? I'll get you back. You know what I mean? I'll put you back on course. It's to like be compassionate before you redirect them, and of course, like we can't always do that. It gets heated in the moment or whatever, but I'm at least in that space. I'm at least thinking about it now, where like previously this would have been like, more foreign to me, I'd say. Like I always came with a somewhat compassionate approach to outreach, but it definitely has like gotten jacked up recently, I would say.
I have some questions about that, but before that, real quick, I there's something that I wanted to do, and which I always forget to do. I'm sorry, when I do streams, is interact with the chat. So I will set a 10-minute timer just to interact with the people in the chat, because, my dear people, I appreciate you. I do. I think everybody appreciates the viewers, and I think Justin appreciates you. I appreciate you a lot. So, and I specifically go to some people's comments sometimes. I really want to answer them because I appreciate them so much. But let's see, because I saw that chat is on strike until they get a response from the host. So I'm so sorry if I have not responded to you. What is it that you want me to respond to you, me or Justin? I have seen a good, nice thing, secure, liberated male energy. Completely agree. Yeah, we're all free. We're expressing emotions and things. That's cool.
Dinesh said, do you think y'all they know that they're live?
Are we live? What's going on?
This was supposed to be a confidential therapy session.
Yeah. Oh, damn. LS says they love your outreach videos.
Thank you. That's awesome. I love to hear that.
Yeah. And Satan Inside asks, are you going to camp out? I know I am going to camp out. I don't know. Are you going to camp out?
I am going to camp out this year. First time. So
nice.
I will be there. Yes.
Same.
I don't know if I'm going to be
also
working or not. I thought about coming and doing a street outreach at camp out, but instead of trying to convince non-vegans to become vegans, trying to convince vegans to become activists. So,
That's a good one. That's a good one.
yeah.
Wait, okay. And wait, no, not this. This was the question. Did you guys plan to have your camera set up to appear to look at each other? No, we did not. It's just a coincidence.
I did. I do that now.
You
Whatever
do
way
that?
it is, I try to look in that position. So if you would have been over here, I would have like moved my camera around.
Interesting. Oh, I am wondering about your setup then in that way, because for me, my setup is very fixed. And if I want to move something about the camera, which by the way, my tripod is now broken. And
no.
yeah. So now one of the legs just falls off. So I have to carry it separately, the one leg. So it's a bipod with a separate leg.
Chip, get a new
so
tripod. Donate
I
some
got a
money to
new
Chip so he can get a new tripod.
I got the temporary tripod from a friend. It's
Okay.
all good. I'm good right now. But I use it for activism, that one, and the one that I have in my house. I said it's fine. I'll just keep it this way. But it's just difficult to move around. So
Yeah.
so as of now, my setup is pretty fixed. But interesting that you have it more dynamic. That's something maybe I should strive for, which I like. Were there any other questions? Justin, have you spent much time studying street epistemology in the atheist sector? Your approach is very similar, I think.
Yeah, a bit. I have studied a bit. I don't go full street epistemology because street epistemology does take quite a while. And also, I don't think it provides like a super clear message at the end, but I definitely take a lot of stuff from street epistemology because I think it's a really good approach. The thing you have to understand, though, is that like street epistemology, motivational interviewing, deep canvassing, and something else, they all are sort of like, they have a lot of overlapping features. And so I would probably describe my approach more as motivational interviewing. And motivational interviewing just happens to have a lot of overlap with street epistemology, is probably the way I'd say it.
I like that. Okay. Wait, I saw something. You incentivize somebody. Carrie, thank you so much, Carrie, for the membership. Yeah. I'm going to try to play out of
tripod
tune
membership.
Thank you. That's an out of tune jigsaw. Okay. Okay. Let's go back to what you said. We were saying. Okay, so you said that therapy kind of influenced your activism. By the way, I had totally different questions, but I like where we're going. Let's just get agile with it. So I'm curious because I myself have also found have reached a position where I'm kind of realizing that therapy and all the work that I do, and I see the problems that I myself have had in other people's and the people that I outreach. However, I feel like, do you think that as outreachers, we should be trying to appeal to these problems in a sense that should we try to go around them because we know the problems, or should we try to give a bit of an insight towards those problems? Or how is it exactly that therapy has influenced you? Because for me, what it has done is that I notice these problems with people, I empathize with them more, but in that sense, I also become a bit more apologetic towards them, and I become a bit more lenient in that position, right? And I don't know if that's necessarily the best positions, because we're defending a cause that the inherent thing that people want to do is not change and not deal with it. So if we're becoming a bit, it's okay, just take your time or whatever, as it can seem that we're not fighting, or that they're not actually wanting to change, that we're not pushing them enough. And I don't know if you understand kind of what I mean by all of this.
Yeah. So I think this is the difference between passive, assertive, and aggressive. And so I recommend this book to everybody, Motivational Methods for Vegan Advocacy by Casey Taft. He is a psychiatrist. He specifically specializes in domestic abuse, and I think he has one of the only like gold standard certified methods for getting domestic abusers to stop doing that abuse. So in the vegan scene, we have like some smattered studies here and there about how to change people's minds, not a lot of peer-reviewed stuff, not a lot of like really solid on that specific topic. However, the cool thing about Casey Taft is apparently he does have that. These are peer reviewed, and this is time tested in the real world with domestic abusers. Now, are domestic abusers exactly the same as non-vegans? Obviously not, but there's a lot of similarities. They're trying to get someone to change their behavior that is inherently, inimical to someone else. That's abusive. He also says how a lot of domestic abusers will give the exact same excuses that non-vegans give, or excuses that are like analogous in the human context, Yeah. And so what he's saying there is that there's probably a pretty good chance that these skills transfer. And in fact, those communication skills just transfer in general. And he is the one that talks about the passive, assertive, and aggressive approaches. And by the way, he didn't come up with this. This is just like throughout, motivational interviewing therapy, these sorts of things. So the difference is that passive approach lets people off the hook. So what you were describing sounded more like a passive approach to me.
Okay.
Aggressive is like when like someone's like, I just love cow's milk, and you're like, oh, that's cool. You like raping cows, you piece of shit, right? That's more of like an aggressive approach, right? Whereas like a passive approach would be like, yeah, well, it is hard to give up, and I guess everyone moves at their own pace, right? That's passive. An assertive approach is like assertive approaches, and what I would do is I do the thing I call like agree, ask, answer, which is sort of validate that at first, be like, yeah, I get that. A lot of people, can have a hard time giving up cow's milk cheese. But the thing is at the end of every purchase, there's a mother cow who was forcibly impregnated, who had her baby stolen from her, and who was ultimately killed. So as long as you continue to purchase cheese, that's going to keep happening on your behalf, And so I don't think there's anything aggressive about that. You just basically told them exactly what the situation was. But you did validate, because like you recognize they're having a human emotion here, right? Like, people have a hard time giving up their habits. So like if you're immediately like, I don't give a fuck about your habits, like, sorry, can I curse on the stream? I always curse.
No, yeah, curse away.
Okay.
Fuck. Let's say fuck. Okay, I'll say fuck twice. So
yeah, exactly. Like if you're like, I don't give a fuck about that. Like who gives a fuck about your selfish interest when there's a cow getting, graped or whatever. And so like, that's the difference. And the thing is that therapy itself advocates for that assertive approach.
It's true.
So they don't advocate for the aggressive approach. They don't advocate for the passive approach. And so to me, that's kind of where I want to be. Now, of course, what is assertive? There is still like a spectrum, of like, there's probably a decent little chunk of like this end of assertive more towards passive and this end of assertive more towards aggressive that you can operate under and still get good results. And so I think that you can still mold that to your own personality and what is like authentically you. Because the other thing, you don't want to go so far away from who you are that your communication becomes inauthentic to the other person, because people can pick up on that. So if you tend to be a very aggressive person, like maybe you can move right to that line of like assertive and aggressiveness, but don't move all the way to just barely being a little more assertive than passive if that's not you, And look, maybe you can't. Maybe all you've got is aggressive, and that's all you can authentically be. I would be careful of that, though, because I think that's an easy out. I think, in the same way with passive on the other side. If you're like, look, I'm just a passive person, I can't really express myself in that way, maybe that's authentically you, and you really, anything beyond that would be just like inauthentic and weird. But I would really, really, really encourage you to try to press on that line and see if you can't get into that assertive zone. A way that assertiveness is often described is that it respects the other person, but it also respects yourself. Meaning like you're respecting their experience, but you are also respecting your own boundaries and actually telling them what it is you need from them. That's a little different here, because it's like what someone else needs from them, namely not to get murdered on their behalf. But in a general sense of therapy and communication, that's what the assertiveness is pointing at.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you say. I guess I think usually my problem is not aggressive, but rather passive in general. And well, at least that's what I grew up to be. So assertive is indeed, as you mentioned, I did work a lot in therapy towards being assertive. And yeah, I mean, as you said, right, there's a spectrum of assertiveness, right? You're either a little bit more passive or a little bit more on the aggressive. And for me, at least, what I find is that sometimes I try to push myself to be on the other side, just to try to be on that other side to see what happens. Whether that's be a bit more aggressive or that to be a bit more passive. But I do I did can't come to the same conclusion that you just mentioned. That is, it can seem not authentic when you do it. It can seem like, what is this guy trying to do? And it kind of ruins the whole outreach. So now I just go with how I feel, and that is trying to be more assertive about it. Like trying to be in the assertive zone, but not trying to be on one or the other, but rather just how it feels in the moment. Still in the assertive zone.
Yeah, and I think that's like, so this is, sometimes I mention this in those little like text box in my video. And I think this is part of like what it is to actually meditate on who you were and who these people are, and to like practice this compassion. Because if you just force the compassion and you aren't actually feeling empathetic towards them, when you say, no, I understand, I also had that concern. Like I say that a lot, but I actually mean it. Like I really mean it. Like I understand where you're coming from. I have compassion for that point. Even if I don't have compassion for what you're doing or paying for, I have compassion for this isolated thing you're saying. I get that. If I didn't have compassion for that and I said that, now maybe I could sell it, it depends on like how good of a, and maybe how good of a liar someone is. But people are generally going to pick up on that. And so it's not just going through the motions. It's not just saying the things. It's not just saying X, Y, Z. You actually have to feel it. And that makes you a better communicator when you actually feel it, because when you're feeling the compassion and you're saying the compassionate thing, that can really make someone feel heard and connected to you. And, in some sense here, disarm them actually, so that they're more open whenever you give them a hard truth. This is the thing is like, even with like the slavery and the Holocaust examples, people are like, dude, you cannot do slavery examples. You cannot do Holocaust examples. People always get mad. They're always going to be offended and things like that. And the reason I use them is not to shock people. It's because, as I said earlier, I just think they're so valuable. They're such a good analog for what's going on multiple levels. But in order to sell those, you have to have a good relationship with the person you're talking to. I mean, you can just say it. You can just say, like, we Holocaust these animals, it's like slavery. You can say that to someone. And, they got the message. It went into their ear at least. But how much are they really going to process that message if they're just viewing you as some crazy vegan, as some extremist, as some just like asshole? Yeah. Like he's just saying that to get a rise out of him. He's just trying to shock me, right? That's what they're going to think. Yeah. That's what their defensive brain allows them. That's their protective mechanism. Oh, he's just an asshole. That's just shock value. That's what people say, right? But when you have like a real conversation with someone, I don't know if you saw my last outreach.
I did.
But yeah, like this woman, I didn't go super explicit, but I was like implying heavily enough, and it sort of hit her like a freight train when I said it to her. But we had a really good communication back and forth. We had a really respectful communication, and it was actually funny. She told me later she was a communication major or something, and so she was also good at communicating, and that also helps, of course, because you recognize your own like deflections and those sorts of things, and you can be more honest with yourself. But because of that just allowed us to have this really, really powerful conversation. Whereas like if I was worse at communicating or she was worse at communicating, maybe it wouldn't have worked. You know what I mean? Maybe I couldn't have dropped that line at the end, or even the lines in the beginning about slavery, and had her like accept them and like see them for what they were.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned that video and you thought it was more assertive. I guess that's not more assertive, but rather more. I don't know how to put it, because I thought you were assertive. I always think you're pretty assertive in your videos. You're pretty clear in your videos about what you're saying. But I didn't get the slightest impression watching that video that you were in any shape or form aggressive or anything. So I think like, I don't know, maybe you're the same as me. I don't know, in that sense, where you're leaning more towards the passive than the aggressive side of assertiveness. But it seems to me like whenever I see your conversations, you're extremely respectful and everybody seems to get it. And you don't seem to ever be aggressive necessarily. Or maybe I also really do watch a lot of aggressive people online, because I kind of want to explore also that side of vegan activism. And
Yeah, and I will say I do have ones where I get more more like chippy with people or whatever. That's a word, chippy. That's not meaning you. I said that and I realized it sounded like like an adjective version of your name. Yeah, I don't get like chippy. Yeah. I don't get vegan power labby with them, but and I don't think that I was aggressive with her in my communication style, but I think I gave her a really hard message. Again, this is what I've been telling people too, is that you have to understand where I am. I am a white guy talking to a black woman in the South. I'm in North Carolina in the United States. And I'm bringing up slavery, compared to animal agriculture. So it is like and again, I'm in a fairly progressive area. So it is like maximum difficulty level to sell that analogy, And so that's, again, why I'm being extra careful with it there. But I figured I had to try it. I wanted to push myself and see if I could get this to stick. And, some people didn't like the analogy that much. I talked to a couple people, and one of them was like really pushing against it. So, there's those videos might be coming out soon. So, yeah, it doesn't always go like that one, but it can.
And that brings me to my next question, which is something that I ask most of the people that I talk to. What is it that you consider when do you consider a conversation to be good or a conversation to be bad? And I assume there is obviously a spectrum along good or bad conversation. And I wonder, is there a reason for you to not publish a conversation, or is there a threshold that a conversation has to pass in order for you to publish it, or is there or the question can be also asked the other way around, because I don't know how people think. Is there a threshold that the conversation has to pass for you to not publish it? How do you decide? Basically, the question is, how do you decide which conversations you publish, which conversations you don't, and which conversation you consider good and which conversation you consider bad?
Okay. Sorry, I was like, there was a lot in that. I actually just wrote some of it down just so I made sure I was going to answer.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I made it a really long question, but the reality is the question is just how do you mark if a conversation is good and whether it's good enough to publish or not?
Yeah. I'm actually just going to go back to therapy really quickly here. There's something I want to say. We were talking about how therapy is a good thing. Therapy in the United States, I know other places have universal health care. In the United States, it's very privileged to be able to do therapy. I happen to have good health insurance that allows me to do therapy. So I don't want anyone like feeling bad if they can't afford therapy. In the United States, it can be quite inaccessible. So I just wanted to put that out there for everybody. I understand that because I have healthcare, I'm in a privileged position to be able to do that and afford it, because otherwise it is horrendously expensive. So which combo is good and which is bad, and how do I decide? Let me tell you how I decide which to publish first. The main thing that prevents me from publishing is it boring in some way, because it's YouTube. So the conversations that are the least publishable are the ones where the person drones on and goes off on like a ton of tangents, and I don't reel them in. And sometimes I'll let them go off, and sometimes I won't, because part of what I'm doing whenever I'm doing activism is experimenting. So I like to go out and like have my like solid, like I'm going to do X, Y, Z, but sometimes, and also I just get bored doing the same thing. So I'm like, switch it up. Let's see what happens if I just take a really, really like active listening frame on this one, And those ones almost never get, like one time I had an hour and a half conversation with a dude and we were going all over the place. I'm never going to publish that video. I'm never going to put up an hour and a half conversation, about.
I had those. I know what you mean. Yeah.
It's like, this is not going to be watchable to people. And also we go off on like some wild tangents. Then we're starting to talk about politics and that sort of thing. I don't typically publish much where I mention anything about politics, because I don't want to distract from the core message. And I do, this is probably a bad thing to some degree, I do kind of view my channel as a product, and the product I'm bringing is like mostly psychology and veganism with a little bit of philosophy around it. I would love to make content on other topics, but I typically don't. So then if something gets like really derailed into another topic, that probably isn't going to get published if it's like really integral to the discussion. I'm trying to think of like what else would make me not publish. I have like a couple videos from a long time ago that I haven't published. Because sometimes I think there's some things that I do differently now than I used to do, and I don't like those old things I do as much. And so I'm like, maybe I won't post those videos, because I want to kind of be putting forward the activism that I think is best and that I think I want people to, if not emulate, be able to like riff on or play jazz with or even criticize. But I don't want them looking at me from like 2 years ago and being like, why did you do X, Y, Z? And me being like, well, actually, I don't do that anymore. So, you know, so I try to
see
keep
what
it,
you mean.
you know what I mean? Yeah, like I try to keep it current because it's, you know, there's multiple things it's for. It's like, one, I want non-vegans to get exposed to this, but two, I want vegans to watch it and I want it to provide something valuable to them. Even if they think I don't like 80% of that, but 20% of that I might take and try to like mold into my own activism. You know what I mean? And so I don't want to be doing a ton of stuff that I don't even agree with or I don't think is like current to the, you know, the state of the art of activism right now. So that would definitely be like, you know, how I would publish or not. So a good convo to me just basically hits a lot of points. So one, I want to show them a video. Like that's like one of my pillars, that I want to show them a video of something. I also want to make sure that I make them feel safe. So I want to say things like, you can leave this conversation. You guys don't see this as much because I cut some of this out. But like before the video even starts, I'm like, okay, so I just want you to know if at any time you don't feel like the conversation is going the way you want, you can walk away. And I'm like, and I know you can walk away, but I'm telling you, you can walk away and I'm not going to think you're a jerk. I'm going to say, thank you, you know, have a good day. Thanks for talking to me. So then they feel at any time, there's not this like pressure, like, so they can always like escape, you know. I say that before every conversation, and I even mention it oftentimes after my initial like, you know, the initial questions that I gauge their values on. So, you know, I ask the value questions, then I say, okay, so just letting you know, the questions are going to get a little harder. Are you feeling good so far? You know, and they'll usually say yes. And so that's just, again, I'm just checking in with them. And it's building that relationship. It's showing like, this is a safe place to be. Like, you are safe in this conversation. We can talk about hard things. There's this phrase in like therapy that's like, when neither person feels safe, you literally can't talk about anything. If both of you aren't feeling safe, you can't talk about the fucking dishwasher without flying off the handle. But when both people feel safe, you can talk about anything. And that's why when we both, like me, this random stranger talking to you, a random stranger, and we're talking about slavery, and we're talking about, you know, putting pigs in gas chambers and the most horrible things ever, and that person still feels safe to explore those ideas, right? So like, I want to have made a good faith effort that I made them feel safe. I want to have shown them a video. At this point, I want some sort of finisher, which is where like, well, actually two things. I want a finisher where I say something like, if you were in the animal's position, how quickly would you want this to stop? Or as long as you continue to do this, this is going to happen on your behalf. So I want that as a finisher at the end. And now what I've integrated is I want like, I have been very much Socratic asking them questions. Like, tell me what you know about this. Tell me what you know about that. And then like, even when they do an objection, I'm like, okay, does that make sense if we think about it this way? But I rarely, in the past, I've rarely just done a little like summary where I like give my sort of philosophical like potted summary. And so I've started doing that now at the end. So I think that's an important part, is to like let them talk most of the time. This is like something in, I think it was, what's the book? Is it Crucial Conversations, or is it the one, How to Win Friends and Influence People? I don't remember, but there's this concept of like a sort of like friendship. I don't like that we put it in monetary terms, but like a bank account almost. And so like, you're basically depositing that whole time by listening to them, by asking them questions and being empathetic and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And the more you deposit, the more you're able to withdraw later, is the sort of idea. So the more compassion and listening and the sort of things you invest in them, the more when it's time for you to say something, they're going to be more willing to listen to you. And so I try to build that up. So at the end, when I give my whole like, you know, animals are objects and this is the root of the problem, when I do that, they're more willing to listen to me, or at least this is like the hypothesis I'm operating under. And so I think those four things are kind of, to me, what makes like a good conversation, because people are just going to get different levels of defensive. Doing those same things, like that woman, she was very receptive, very sort of not intuitive, very reflective, I would say, and very self-aware. Some people aren't. Some people just start shooting off objections, you know. And so you've got to answer those as well. And I don't think a conversation is bad because a person puts up a lot of objections. That doesn't make a conversation bad. How you handle those objections can make the conversation better or worse. But just the fact that they have objections isn't bad, because you're basically saying, hey, you know, this thing that literally everyone you know and love has done their whole lives and you've done your whole life, and I'm saying it's one of the most atrocious things ever. You know what I mean? You can't expect most people to be like, fair point. All right, later, dude. You know what I mean? Some people do, but like it's like, to expect everyone to do that is just like completely unrealistic. So people are going to want to work through it. But I think you want to view these objections not as an attack on you or the animals, but as just like a fact of human neurology, that this is how you have to work through things. You have to deconstruct them in your mind. And so what you're their guide. You know what I mean? You're not their opponent. Yeah. You're not boxing them. You're not even their friend. You know, I think that's important. You're not their friend in this moment, but you are their guide. And if you think of yourself in more of this like teacher relationship, where like you want what's best for them, but you're not there to sugarcoat it, but you're also not there to be like an abusive teacher, right? You're there to actually walk them through this in the best way that you know how. And so, you know, obviously the objection handling is its own thing. I mean, we could like segment that off individually, but I think hitting those things, you know, making them feel safe, showing some sort of video or imagery, having a sort of summary statement, and then having that like kind of finisher that like brings it home for them and is like, you are paying for this. This is done on your behalf. Having something that's really like unambiguous at the end, so that they like know that. I think that's generally makes a pretty good outreach.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like everything you said, and I can relate to a lot of it. I also try to make people feel safe about it, and I haven't tried telling them that you can walk away at any time. I have noticed that it's true that some people they're afraid to walk away just so that they don't seem like jerks, or maybe they have this really strong social convention in their head where I can't walk away from this person regardless if they're saying something. They're not. I just can't walk away. So I like that. I'll try to introduce that from now on. That's a very good thing. And you touched upon video, and I know we talked about it together. And I wonder, the reason why I don't ask people to show them footage of something, which, sorry, that was me too.
No, something. I feel like the light is flickering or something, and I'm like confused about what's happening, because the light is like from the sky. Like it's coming through my window, so I'm like wondering why it's flickering. Sorry, go ahead.
So the reason why I don't usually ask people to show them footage is because I feel like, well, in the places where I'm at, people will generally tend to have excuses to go. We have to go to a museum. I have to go to a station. I have to go here. And they'll quickly, the minute I give them an out, I feel like they will take an out. And I am wondering if you yourself have run into these situations where you asked if they want to see a video and that just ended the conversation because they're like, yeah, you know, actually no, but I have to go and I'll catch up later on something like that.
Yes. So the first thing is, when you tell them they can leave at any time, that also will sometimes end conversations. Not a huge percentage, but some people will just walk away. And so you have to accept that. But I think that is like part of it, because it's not just for them, it's also for you. It's showing that you are the kind of person who will just let someone walk away if they need to walk away. You know what I mean? And I think it does show there is a certain level of respect. Obviously, we want to be fighting for the animals, but when they walk away, that's just another person you can be talking to, right? Someone who's going to walk away in that moment, I think probably wasn't the best person to talk to anyway. And so I think you're doing a bit of a filtering for people who are more receptive to the message. You know what I mean? So it's both respectful, and I think it probably ends up being more efficient in the end. But I don't know about the second part. Maybe not. But I think, again, part of this whole thing is putting yourself in the right mindset, right? We can tell you every little cute phrase to say and every debunk and all that, but there is a general mindset and a general vibe that is just better to come into these conversations with. And it's just going to make you effective across any type of conversation you run into about veganism, and really any type of conversation in general. And so I think that's an important skill to just develop for any activist. Because the other thing to remember too is, we're talking about street activism, but people also want to do systemic activism, more like they want to talk to like government officials and restaurants and city planners and whatever. And you're going to have all sorts of conversations with people. And so that, like, you can't come into like talking to a city council person or, I don't know, like a restaurant or like, hey, we're thinking about doing XYZ, and just like with the most aggressive, like Tash Peterson-esque, like, running in with blood all over yourself. Like you have to acquire these communication skills. No hate to Tash, by the way. I think she's doing wonderful work. But
I wrote it down. I'm sorry, just go.
but different like situations call for different communication, right? So, so yeah, I think you acquire a broader, more generalizable skill from even taking on that same sort of mindset. I forget what you asked me. I have no idea what you asked me. I'm sorry.
Oh, about the video. If people walk away
Yes,
from
the
the video. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Sorry, I was touching on the first thing. Yeah, now the video.
Yeah.
I have had that. People, I did have that recently where someone walked away at the point of the video. That person had a child with them, and they were kind of off to the side, and it was like my first outreach of the day, and I was like, just follow the formula. And when I said the video, like, she looked very scared, and she's like, I got a kid, and she did the thing you said. She's like, I got to go. We got to be somewhere,
Yeah.
And so I think yeah, sometimes you have to definitely read the room on that. However, I will say that most of the time, especially recently, they'll either say no, and if they say no, so if they say no, I have to go, that's a little different. Because sometimes people are like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, okay, don't worry. Like, if they say no, I'm pretty quickly, and it looks like they're going to walk away, I'm like, yeah, don't worry about it. We can just talk about it. I just like to, offer that to people since I think it's more powerful. And usually they'll stay at that point. But one thing I noticed is that you can't do it deep in the conversation, or that will cause people to go, because that breaks the flow. So it's got to be close to the beginning. So when I do it, I basically ask, I go through whatever my first like 3 or 4, like, what do you think animal abuse is? What do you think about people who abuse animals? Whatever sort of little openers I want to use. And then I typically say, what do I say? I say, do you think you participate in any industries that abuse animals? Or if I use that killing and enslavement one, like, do you think in order to get these animals on your plate, they have to be killed or enslaved? And usually they'll say like, yes, no, and I'll be, and then I say, what do you know about the pig industry is usually the one I go with, pig or egg industry. I'm like, what do you know about that? Like I say, like, I actually ask them to paint me a picture now. I think this is better. I say, okay, you've got the baby piglet. They're going to live their life in some way, and then they're going to be on your plate. Walk me through everything you know about that.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. And because people, I go, do you know what happens? They're like, oh, yeah, I know. And I'm like, do you? Like, what do you know? And they're like, oh, I know it. I know it's bad. Like, they'll say that. And I'm like, but be specific. What's bad? And the thing that everyone seems to know, they're like, oh, they're like force-fed and they're cramped and they're hormones. People always say those 3. They never know the worst things. That's what I'm saying. Is like, even the things that they think are terrible aren't the most terrible things. And so I'm like, so after they do that, I go, yeah, that's definitely some of it. That's part of it. Can I show you a brief 1-minute video of what actually happens? I don't usually say actually. I say, can I show you a brief 1-minute video of what happens in the industry? And I make sure I say brief and 1 minute, because I really want to sell, like, it's not going to be that long. We can watch this quickly. And many people will watch that. A surprising, I would say, like, at least 50 to 70% of people I ask that watch it, if I ask it at that time. However, you can get derailed. So sometimes I'll say, like, do you think the animals have to be killed and enslaved in order to get them on your plate? Or, do you support any industries that you think systematically abuse animals? And the person will, like, already obviously see where I'm going. And they'll be like, yeah, but the thing is, we need to eat. We need to eat meat, right? They'll say something like that. And so they'll go immediately into, the objection phase of the discussion. And what I've noticed is, what I used to do is be like, okay, well, yeah, do you think we have to? I just, my typical Socratic, like, because that seems right? Like, I'm not going offensively at them. I'm just asking Socratically as they object. But what I've done a couple times, I did this at University of Pennsylvania with ASAP, when people would start doing that, I would just act like they hadn't said it, which is like a weird thing to do. But, I'd say, like, yeah, do you think the animals have to be killed or enslaved in order to get them on your plate? And they'd be like, yeah, but you have to eat meat or whatever. And so, like, they would say the objection. I would ignore the objection. I'd be like, what do you know about the pig industry? Like, what do you think? And then I would say that thing again. And if they keep doing it, like, if they keep being like, yeah, well, I just think it's like, okay, and I just keep going back to my question. I'm like, but what, but yeah. And I even will say, like, oh yeah, we can totally get to that. I just want to see, like, what, I like to know people's knowledge base before we start. Like, what do you think happens from A to Z? And at that point, if they're getting really defensive, I won't push the video.
Okay, interesting.
I don't push
Yeah.
the video at that point. Then I'm like, okay, we just want to talk this out because I know the video is going to make them bounce. But if they're just kind of open, they're like, yeah, I guess they do have to be killed. I guess they do have to be enslaved. And then I ask them, then I'm going for the video for sure. If they start getting defensive though, don't answer their defenses right away. Go back and make sure they know what happens in the industry first before you talk about it. I think that's super important that they get that knowledge. And I think it's important for a couple reasons. When, even with vegans, when we're talking about like animals should have rights, animals aren't objects, like the different things we say, they shouldn't be commodified. They're someone, not something. Those things I think are very good once you're a little deeper into the conversation. Whenever we're learning, there's this thing called the curse of knowledge. And part of like with the curse of knowledge and the curse of expertise, part of the problem with them is once you know something really well, or you're an expert in something, it starts to become hard for you to teach someone about that because it's hard for you to remember all the baseline assumptions and the foundational knowledge you have that person doesn't. And so you start just explaining it as if, you're explaining it back to yourself who already has these baseline assumptions, but they don't necessarily have those. And so it's important to kind of build that out to begin with. Like, I don't know if you've ever played, I don't know if you play many board games or anything, but
I do.
If you ever have someone try to describe a board game to you that you've never played and that they've played a lot, it is garbage.
Always. It is always bad. Always. Yes. I feel like I'm always when I'm with my friends groups with my friend group and we have a board game that we want to play and that's something that I know how to play. I feel like I'm usually better at doing this because I kind of understand the baseline as you mentioned, but there's board games where I also get lost in it. So when it's pretty complex, it's very easy to get lost in this whole situation, right? Because it's a complex issue.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to describe a board game, so it's definitely hard to describe this. And so so what I'm doing is I'm trying to take this airy philosophical stuff, which seems obvious to us now because we think about it all the time, right? And I'm trying to bring it down to earth. I want concrete examples. What happens to this pig? What happens to these chickens? This happens, then this happens, then this happens. I want them, and I also want us to be coming from at least a somewhat similar knowledge base. Because if I'm saying these animals are objectified and what they're thinking is like, oh, they're kind of put in pens or like, whatever. They have this very vague, like even when I ask them, sometimes they can't articulate it. I want what actually happens to be crystal clear in their mind, not as an abstraction, but as a concrete thing before we then talk about it. And there's no better way to get that concrete thing than to have like a video or imagery. If I can't do that, I still walk them through that and tell them. But if I can have that imagery, then, I think I just think it's really important for all the reasons mentioned. The thing is, you don't have to show, this is something I've been toying with, you don't have to show imagery of these animals being tortured. You don't have to do that. You could also show something about, something else that shows their individuality. So maybe you show, one of these videos of the cows who get excited when like a person puts a ball near them, a certain ball that they like to play with, or a toy they like to play with, or even another animal. They're like maybe their friend cow or like their friend who's a pig, right? And show that connection between the animals, and even maybe something too like about their cognitive ability, even though like we don't want to focus exactly on cognitive ability, but cognitive ability we all tend to use as a proxy for these other morally salient things. And so a video like that, I think, could also be very powerful, and also something people would want to watch, I think. Something they'd be more willing to watch. I haven't put together a video like that. I wish someone would put together a quick, 60 to 90 second video like that so I could use it. If anyone wants to do that.
60, 90-second video. That's a very, very good point. I'm writing it down, by the way.
Okay.
We should go through the comments because the timer rang.
Okay.
But I also, before that, real quick, I really need to go to the bathroom. My bladder is very small. So I'll be back in 1 minute.
Okay, sounds good. All right, I'll carry this stream. Do I see any questions? Well, I can't see the questions, I guess, that are put in. Don't see many questions, even ones pointed at Vegan Power Lab. All right, maybe I'll just sit here in silence. Justin, you're a great human. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Man, I can't find anything. Oh yeah, I already saw these questions. Okay. All right, we're all caught up. Whew. I did forget to ask Chip if he plays Magic the Gathering. I think someone said that he plays Magic the Gathering.
I'm back. Magic the Gathering. Is that like a tabletop RPG?
Oh, okay. I thought someone said that you played that at one point in another stream. I was going to ask you if you play Magic the Gathering. It's a card game.
It's a card game. No, I don't
Yeah.
play that. No, I haven't.
Okay.
I haven't tried it. So I'm open to. I really like board games. I have like I want to say like a whole closet full of board games nowadays, but I don't have a lot of friends to play with since being vegan. Everybody just
you just cut them out.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily intentionally cut them out. It's just that, I only put one condition with my friends, and I said, when we meet, if you want to eat, just be vegan when you eat with me. You don't have to be vegan, but just be vegan when you're with me. Like, don't eat animal products when you're with me. And seems like most people don't agree with that. So I'm like, okay, then we're not going to meet.
Well, that sucks.
Yeah.
Wait, you play tabletop
exactly.
RPGs though?
I did play 2 tabletop RPGs, but no standard or conventional tabletop RPGs, but rather I had a person who was a storyteller, and it was super, super fun. I really want to play them again. It's I had a character and I grew it a lot because one of the tabletop RPGs that we played was a mission that took 6 months, maybe. It was a lot of with 1 game per week, and
oh wow,
yeah, it was very nice.
Yeah, wow, 6 months of 1 game per week is a ton. That's a that's a massive endeavor. Yeah, no, I love D&D. So I love all that stuff.
Oh, okay, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, it's very similar, right? In that sense, where you have throw that dice with 12.
I got it right here. There's my 20
nice.
Right
Oh, nice. Yeah, I haven't played Dungeons and Dragons, but I think it would be even better because it's like you don't just get you also have these other things, right? You have these objects from the game. I don't know how to call them otherwise. These props in the game that help you get even more immersed otherwise. In the story that I played, the storyteller would sometimes use music to help us immerse more in the action, music or sound effects. And it was really cool because I remember when we had the final battle, when we had the biggest thing going on, he played this music that was crescendoing like more and more and more and more. And I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. Yes, we're winning. It was so good. I loved it. I loved it so much. Yeah. I at first I didn't get it. At first I was like, what's going on? What's a tabletop RPG? Why? What are we doing? But it was really good. Yeah.
You gotta let go of your ego a little bit when you play, especially if you start role playing and really getting into it. It just makes it. Yeah. It's just silly. I mean, it's basically like it's sort of like collective improv, but with some rules and some like fighting. So.
Yeah. Exactly. It's exactly that. I don't know. Did you take any questions in the chat, by the way?
I was kind of like looking quickly, and I didn't exactly see anything. Although someone said that they were asking me questions, and I ignored them, but I don't know what they were.
So I saw one question that I also wanted to ask you, but now I forgot it. It's either Dobrik asked you or a lot of. Wow. It was a bit. I should have. Okay. Oh yeah, if people, do you also ask people just to give them more safety? Do you ask them if, or do you tell them that if they don't want to be, if they don't want you to post this video, that they're not going to post it? Or do you have any of these situations where posting or not posting is a case? And how do you handle those with the people?
Yeah, so I also, in the beginning, I also kind of like, again, just to build rapport and be kind of silly with them, but also get their consent. I say, you know, you can leave at any time. Also, you see that there's a camera right there, right? Because I have a giant camera. And I'm like, you know, there's a
Yeah.
camera right there, right? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, you know, this might go on YouTube. And they're like, yes. I'm like, okay, good.
Okay.
So it's just a kind of quick, whatever. I had someone ask me not to put it up. I don't think I have. I know other activists have had that because other people have like messaged me and been like, what do I do? You know, I think it's going to be a personal decision for you. I think generally if someone asked me not to post a video, I wouldn't post it.
Same.
I imagine there might be scenarios where maybe I still would. Like maybe if the person was being really, really disingenuous and like, I don't know, like I just felt like they were just completely being a troll the whole time. And, you know, but if someone gives a good faith, like, don't put this up, I'm not going to put it up. I also originally would just do interviews with whoever walked up. And so like there were kids who walked up who were like probably between like 14 and 16.
Yeah.
And so I ended up blocking out their faces for one interview. But at this point, I just don't actually interview anyone who's under 18. I don't. That's up to, you know, I know some activists do. There's no judgment from me on that. My personal line there was, you know, it's still a bit of the Wild West out there as far as content and like what it means to be on the internet forever. And I just kind of wanted to make sure like that cutoff, like maybe these people don't know quite what they're consenting to yet or quite the implications of having this conversation, especially because like I obviously think that veganism is eventually going to just be the baseline. And so
Yeah,
I do
agree.
think as a kid, what I don't want to happen here, right? You know, like let's say everyone goes vegan in 20 years. Let's say there's this really quick uptick. Then people going
Quick?
back. Yeah.
20 years is quick? No, we want it faster. I'm kidding. I'm
I
kidding.
think I'll tell you, it's funny. And Natalie and me did an interview way back in the day, and I think she asked me how long I thought it would be till like at least like I think maybe like a major country goes vegan or something. I can't remember
Yeah.
exactly what we said, and I think I put it around like 2070, you know, and I think someone asked AI recently, and AI said like 2075. So I'm basically like, okay, I'm pretty much right there with AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know where I was going with that. I already lost the plot.
Oh, I'm sorry. I interrupted you. I also lost the plot just now.
Like, what was the original question?
The question was, it started with, what if somebody says do not post this?
Oh, right. Yeah. So what I don't want happening is like everyone goes vegan in 20 years, and then you go back and there's this like 16-year-old like being a troll because that's what 16-year-olds do. And people are like, oh, we need to cancel this speciesist. You know what I mean? Sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't want, and of course, you know, obviously, you know, adults would be at the same risk of that, but I think they just know what they're in for more. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if somebody comes up with a video where Biden is racist as he was 16 or something, right? It's kind of the same lines, right? Somebody grows up to be an important person or whatever, and then they're vegan, but then somebody finds this video about them. I get that.
Yeah.
It has happened to me, by the way, that people have asked me not to post a video, and funnily, like ironically enough, the people that have asked me to not post the videos were actually pretty good conversations and people that were very open-minded towards the idea. And I was like, okay, but it's a pity because you did such a good job. Yeah. I had like 2 conversations that I did not post. And well, I have a lot of conversations that I post, but I had like 2 conversations that people have asked me to not post. And I thought they were so good that pity, but I respect their wishes.
That's rough. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've definitely had good ones where like I didn't hit record on the camera. Those are also
that happened to me also.
And that is brutal. Especially like I've had some really good ones. They're just like, well, they're lost to the void. Like just throw them in the ether. How long have you been vegan, Chip? I don't think I know.
Uh, 2.5 years. I don't know. I've been vegetarian for a long time, and then I switched to veganism because I thought I'm doing good for the animals, but then, you learn about the dairy industry. And I remember learning, I started kind of along the same lines as you with watching debate videos because I find them fascinating and I like hearing how people argue in debates, especially because I'm very much into logic and logical consistency and critical thinking and all this kind of stuff. I was very much into that. So that was the only thing to watch. And the vegan debates are, like if you search for debates, I think vegan debates are kind of the first things that come on YouTube anyway.
Yeah.
And I think I watched a lot of Joey's debates, Joey Carbstrong's debate, and he was mentioning dairy and the things that happen in the dairy industry. I kept justifying it to myself for, I think it took me like a week of watching debates or vegan debates. No, less than a week, maybe couple of days actually of watching vegan debates to finally go vegan, and I was mostly watching all the debates and trying to be on the other side of the debate, right? Like kind of like what you said, probably the where I try to, oh, is this their argument? No, I think that wasn't a good argument. I would try to go this route or whatever. And I think at some point there was one person. Well, upon watching a lot of these debates, you form a tree and of arguments, and there wasn't one person that matched every one of my arguments in the right order or the order that they appeared in my head, but rather there were multiple discussions where my arguments were presented in this whole tree. And I feel like somehow my tree formed better and better as I watched these debates. And at some point there was one thing that Joey said, which was, well, because my whole argument was, I know that dairy is the way it is this way. I understand that that's kind of what he says it is, but that's not what I want to pay for. So my intent is not to pay for cows to be forcefully impregnated or for cows to have their babies separated from their mother, but rather my intent is just to have the leftover milk. So it's not necessarily my problem that that's happening. And I understood something, Joey saying something like, well, you are paying for this, so you are supporting this or something along those lines. And I was like, shit. I distinctly remember that I was cooking and I wanted to go to the bathroom, and I'm going to the bathroom with my headphones on, listening to Joey speak. He says that thing. I stop and I'm like, fuck. And I didn't go to the bathroom. It took me a minute, and then I said, I gotta go vegan. That's all it is. So, and then I went vegan. So
Nice.
it was interesting. Yeah, it's very. I really loved that. I really loved that whole switch. For me, that was a very beautiful. I felt like going vegan for me was. It felt normal. It felt like the right thing to do. I didn't have any reluctance towards it. My friends had reluctance when I told them that I'm vegan, or everybody just like it was. I don't know how. And actually, one of my questions was that, like, how was your situation with friends and people when you told them that you're vegan? Because for me, when I told people I'm vegan, instantly people started being defensive, and I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I said, I'm vegan, but I'm not telling you anything else. How was your situation when you started telling people that you're vegan?
Yeah, well, I think, something you said was interesting. I kind of had a similar experience where, like, I remember after watching some certain amount of those videos and hearing these arguments, I walked downstairs one day and I just said to my girlfriend, I was like, fuck, I think I have to go vegan. Yeah, it's kind of similar with you. And I think there's something about that. People talk about, like, belief. This comes up a lot in, like, debates about God. Pascal's wager is, like, they say, even if you don't believe in God, you should believe in God anyway, just because you hedge your bets. And it's like, that's not how belief works. Like, your brain is presented with certain information, and it just it just believes something. There is no deciding to believe it. And it is odd because I think it's a little different with veganism, but it had a similar quality to it for me, where, like, it wasn't like deciding to be vegan, deciding to cut animal body parts out of my life. It just kind of, like, happened. It was like, I cannot not do this. It's like duty just demands that I no longer, make this very direct participation in this. And so, yeah, I think there is something there's like an automaticity to it or whatever that is like it isn't. I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, but the way you described it there was so similar to my experience, and it feels like it's like falls somewhere between that like it is a conscious choice, but there's something deeper. I don't know quite how to describe it. I don't.
There's
know
a
if I have
click
words
that
for it.
happens,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
yeah. I understand what you mean. Yeah, there is, because a lot of the times I think like you understand some of the arguments. You like there's problems in this world where you understand it, you logically know it, but you don't have that. I don't know. I want to call it full understanding, but maybe I don't know. From an outside perspective, you can say exactly all the right things, but from an inside perspective, maybe there's something that you don't understand right there and there, right? So I think when the way I see it is, I think there's a I think to me intelligence, that's just how I see it. To me, intelligence is amount of data and how you handle this data. That's kind of how I see intelligence in my head, and imagination, let's say. But maybe it's a bit more complex. But like, I just want to mention this part. And whereas you can have a lot of data, but if you don't have this mechanism of how you should use the data, then having a lot of data is not really useful, right? So I think that for me, at least, what happened was that I had the data, but I didn't have the mechanism. So when I heard exactly the right thing and my mind instantly understood the mechanism, that's when I kind of made the click and I realized and I connected the dots. And yeah. Oh, you have a dog?
Yeah. Actually, hold on a second. He just got stuck in my room.
Yeah, no way.
Give me 1 second.
Let's see what happens in the chat.
You gotta go get Mama.
Guys in the chat, are you being don't be stop banning people. Don't ban Riley. Riley has actually helped me talk to Vegan Gains today, and yeah, just be nice. Just be nice. Just be nice, okay? We're all vegans. We're all fighting for the same thing. It's horses this time, okay? Yeah. We'll discuss horses at some point also. I don't know. But this isn't the time to discuss horses. This is the time to listen to me and Justin. So stop discussing horses.
What's horses?
Oh, it's basically is riding horses a vegan position, or that's the question, right? Because I think the disagreement almost always comes from Vegan Gains and the fact that he is vegan, but he does have a horse and he rides the horse, and his justification is that he rides the horse because it's good for the horse to exercise. And the other perspective is that, which myself find myself on the other perspective, is that it's not okay to ride horses because it's not okay to use animals, and riding them would mean using them. And if you really have to make sure that the horse exercises, you don't necessarily have to ride them, but just like make them exercise. I don't know. What is your position on this, since we touched upon this?
I haven't heard this argument. I guess I would probably need to hear it from Vegan Gains. I mean, just on the face of it, it seems like anathema to veganism to be riding horses. But I guess I don't really know his argument for it, so maybe I'd have to listen to that. Yeah, I mean, that would just be my knee-jerk reaction to it.
I like that.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a particularly deep take.
No, but it's important that that we give people the benefit of a doubt, and I like that you do that. We don't just talk about somebody else on the side without giving them the benefit of a doubt. I like that. That's in a way very respectful. So, yeah.
I didn't know. That's wild to me. I didn't know that Vegan Gains had a horse. Even, it looks like when he's filming, it looks like he lives in like an apartment.
I mean,
so like, where's his horse at?
It's gonna sound weird, but I recently found out about Vegan Gains, like very recently. I knew about you before I knew about Vegan Gains. I knew about Natalie before I knew about Vegan Gains. Yeah, it's
interesting.
I found out about Vegan Gains fairly recently, and I started watching some of his videos fairly recently, and I think he's a very intelligent person. I really do like to listen to some of his arguments, but I also think that he's not impervious to cognitive biases and such. So, yeah,
Well, yeah, none of us are. No one is
None of us
impervious
are.
to cognitive biases.
None of us.
That is wild that you found me before Vegan Gains. I don't even know how that happens. Like, basically everyone finds like Earthling Ed, Joey, Vegan Gains. Like, I feel like those are like the introductory three, and then like once YouTube feeds you those, like it trickles down. You find us
curious.
plebs at the bottom here, the pedestrians.
I don't know if I found you before Earthling Ed. So for me, it was Joey.
Oh no, I
Definitely
doubt
was
that.
the first. But Ed, I also haven't started watching Earthling Ed from the beginning, if you ask me. Although I wish I would, because his conversations were really good. So
Wow.
yeah, it's just, I mean, we're victims of the algorithm, right? If the algorithm provides us with, it's not a choice of mine. It's just what the algorithm provided me with. And I think because I was sort of going into this smaller channel, the algorithm started giving me more smaller channels instead of the bigger ones. I see that it does
Okay.
that sometimes.
That's true. Yeah, like if you got into that first, and then it kind of
Yeah.
just interesting.
Okay, I wanted to ask you something, but before that, well, I have a lot of other questions that I wrote down, but you're pretty jacked, by the way. I don't know if somebody told you this, but like, do, do you lift or stuff? Because you look pretty jacked. You're in good physical condition. It seems
Yeah,
like.
I think you're more jacked than I am though. I think you're definitely
Yeah,
stronger than me.
that's
Yeah,
because I trained for it
okay. Well, yeah. How often do you train?
every day,
Oh
almost
wow.
every day.
Okay. Okay.
I
Yeah.
would say 5 times per week, 5 to 6 times per week. So yeah.
Okay, that's hardcore. Yeah, I lift like twice a week, maybe 2.5 times, depending on like today I was supposed to lift, but this you're eating into my lifting time. Usually I do two lifting days at the gym
No.
and then one at home. Yeah, losing my gains. Yeah, so I lift a bit. The thing is, I just been lifting for a very very long time, pretty consistently. So yeah, people ask me for lifting advice, and I always tell them the best advice is boring advice. You know, do compound movements mostly. Where you have injuries, veer away from compound movements and do more single joint exercises. Eat a sufficient amount of protein and calories. Try to get that 1.6 grams per kilogram. Get good sleep, and be consistent. And if you do those things, then and you actually do them for like a year or two, you're gonna be muscular. You're gonna be in good shape. There's more to it than that, but like that's what you need. It doesn't matter what angle. Like if you're doing a 45-degree angle or a 37-degree angle for your tricep kickbacks, that's not super important. You don't need to be eating goji berries or like some specific superfood. Like there's no magic pills. There's like no magic exercises. It's just in the same way of the one that we talk about, like what diet is the healthiest. It's dietary patterns that are performed consistently over time. The same thing is with lifting. It's lifting patterns performed consistently over time. Yeah. So that's basically my lifting advice. If you can do them injury free, though, yeah, deadlifts probably are the one exercise that's kind of magical in that, like, I don't know like what puts on more muscle per unit time than doing deadlifts, but
I hope you're breathing horizontally. I know a lot of people don't. I recently I found out like this, I don't know, for a year ago when I started training for powerlifting. But I hope you're you're breathing horizontally into your belly when you're.
I don't even deadlift because I injured myself so much back in the day.
Okay.
But I have a guy in my D&D group actually who is going to take me out because there's multiple people in my D&D group. He fixed 2 of their forms. They were also people who stopped deadlifting because their back was messed up. He's like, just come out with me. We're going to have a strongman day and a deadlift day. He goes to like a powerlifting and strongman gym. And he's like, I'm going to fix it so I just do rack pulls right now, kind of light rack pulls.
Oh, I
but
like
he's
that.
We'll
Those are
fix
good.
it. And you can do deadlifts again. So we'll see. I just did back squats for the first time in a long time. Normally I do goblet squats because of the lower risk of injury. But of course, I have to do high reps, right? Then in like the 15-20 rep range, because like
that's a lot of reps.
Yeah, well, the biggest kettlebells we have, at our place are like, I don't know, maybe 80 pound kettlebells or something. I don't know what that is in kilograms, but
maybe 40.
yeah,
I would
somewhere
usually
like
split
that.
in half. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I have one question that I also saw in the chat, and I'm just gonna come back to activism. I wanted to tell you that you're jacked just because I noticed it, and then like, yeah, I'm also jacked. I get it, but like I kind of advertise a lot of it. You don't really advertise a lot of that, so that's why I wanted to put it out
yeah,
there.
yeah.
So how do you feel about disruptive activism in general, not necessarily protests? Because you touched upon Tash Pedersen. Ha!
You
How
can't
do you
say
feel
anything
about?
in here. So
No, you can. So.
there's a, how do I answer this? So broadly speaking, I kind of look at activism as an ecosystem, in the sense that I think if we were to only do one type of activism, that would not be good. And so I want there to be this panoply of different types of activism, because it may be that in given situations or even in given historical moments, certain types of activism are going to rise above and be better in that given situation than others. I also think something like a disruptive protest kind of pairs well with something more like an Earthling Ed outreach or an even outreach like I do, or all these great outreachers. But that sort of like softer, more empathetic, more compassionate outreach, because I think there's something really powerful with like the disruptive protest, like puts it in your mind, like, oh wow, what is going on here? Like those crazy vegans, they're a bunch of jerks, they're militant. And then you run into a vegan who isn't that, and it's like, I think it messes with your mind in a different way. If you had just met, if it was nothing but these compassionate vegans just doing outreach, we're probably not going to get a lot of media coverage, right? We're not going to get these like huge, like, you're not going to get someone like the vegan teacher who has like 1 million subscribers on TikTok or something. You're not going to get on Piers Morgan. Like, I'm not going to get on Piers Morgan doing my outreach videos, right? And so I do think there's a power in that. I think there's a power too, specifically in doing you even being the person to do the disruptive protest, and then getting on Piers Morgan and being sort of more calm, rational, just putting the arguments forth. So I think that even if a particular type of activism in isolation might not be that useful, I think paired with other types of activism, it could be very useful, and you could get a sort of like whole is greater than the sum of the parts sort of thing. You know what I mean? This is where, 2 + 2 = 5, not 4. So I definitely think that disruptive protests, my bias is against them, I will tell you. I don't like the idea too much of doing a disruptive protest as opposed to talking to people, or as opposed to like trying to get laws passed, or maybe like more plant-based options in places, or plant-exclusive options in like universities and things like that. I like all those things more than I like the idea of disruptive protests. And I think even my personal style isn't suited to disruptive protests. And so because of that, I probably have an even stronger bias against it. However, I do like watching them. I do think they're pretty entertaining to watch. And I do really appreciate the courage that it takes to do them. So like in that sense, like I'm like pro disruptive protests. I'm more skeptical about what it is they accomplish. And I think it matters what the ask is. So I'll say something here. This will probably annoy a lot of people, because I even have people in my own like group near me who do these protests. So like if you're doing a disruptive protest to get like the oat milk charge dropped, like that was the thing with Starbucks, like make it so that oat milk and cow's milk are the same price. I think that's awesome. I think that really is like, if you can get that to happen, wow, that just how much more likely are people going to be to pick that? And also now, oat milk doesn't seem like this like bougie privileged choice. I think there's like an interesting normative effect it has. They also did, they recently in, I guess, Philadelphia, they were doing disruptive protests to get rid of horse carriages. Horse-drawn carriages. And what happened is it actually worked, and they now have like, I guess, like automated carriages or electric carriages or whatever. And it's like, okay, cool. So that very specifically displaced this piece of animal exploitation, and also a very visible type of animal exploitation, right? So I think there's an interesting normative effect there. Like, this is not okay. Like the fact that we have these is showing this is not okay. So very obvious to people. I am more skeptical of specifically like a foie gras protest. And the reason is because if you get foie gras off of a menu, people are still going to go to that restaurant, and they're probably not going to be like, oh man, I was really wanting that foie gras. I guess I'll get lentils in a salad now. I think they're going to be like, oh man, I was really wanting that foie gras. I guess I'll get chicken now, or I guess I'll
Yeah.
get cow now. And so I'm a little more skeptical that like on the like 1-to-1 that it does something when people come in there. And I don't know, like I know like one place, I think it was potentially near us, where like they got rid of foie gras and then they sold like duck liver pate, but not foie gras. So like essentially the same thing, but I guess the bird didn't have the thing down their throat.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah, it is more of a welfarist thing, isn't it? It's
yeah, I think so. And it's, I mean, I think there's a double layer for me in that. The welfarist argument is, I don't personally resonate quite as much with welfarist tactics. I am open to the fact that they could, in principle, or they could in practice, be very effective. I just don't know what the data is on that. Like if it turned out that you went and made cages bigger, and it caused eggs to shoot up by 800%, and then no one could buy eggs, and then eggs go out of business. Like I wouldn't be against that. I don't know that the data has shown that is the case. And so I think you have to weigh how big that win is versus the cover that you give the companies after that. Of like, oh, well now I do cage-free, I do free range. Like you've sort of handed them, in some sense, on a silver platter, this humane washing.
and also it.
Good.
I was going to add to this that it also happens that sometimes that people will disagree less with the idea of using the animals because they're put in situations where they're like, well, the animal lives okay. What's that so bad that we kill them at some point? It's not that bad, right? So it kind of sometimes can also, welfarist movements can also make the idea of completely liberating animals a bit more difficult in that sense, right? Sometimes.
Yeah, and so the thing that's interesting is that you have people who are liberationists, who will promote like a welfare approach, and so it's kind of interesting because they are wanting obviously liberation at the end of the day, but they have a different strategic vision of what that looks like. And so I think when we're looking at that, we just have to weigh all those pros and cons, and that there are symbolic like contradictions, I would say, that a position like that can represent. And so we have to be mindful of like how negative are those symbolic contradictions, and how negative are the effects, the externalities of giving people this humane washing out, so yeah, those would be the things I would be careful of. But again, like it depends on what you're disruptively protesting for.
Fair.
So disruptive protests in themselves, again, they're not my bag. They're not the first thing I would go to. I think they probably do have a place. And the thing is that disruptive protests were part of like pretty much every justice movement in history. So they clearly, there's some value there. I just think that we want to like harness that value in the right way. And so like depending on what it is that that we're protesting. So that is kind of what's kind of weird, when we just focus on, when you focus on one thing, it's like, it's just because like you can't, I don't know if disruptive protests can ask for everything. I don't know if it's realistic.
Yeah.
But if they don't ask for everything and they ask for one thing, then you get these sort of weird, again, like sort of philosophical or symbolic contradictions. And so it's kind of hard to know like what the best strategy is based on that. So
it's a good point. I myself have found myself, because I'm I don't know how many videos of mine you have seen, but my approach is very close to, I mean, you're obviously more professional and better at this than I am, but I find myself very close. My approach is very close to your approach in the sense that I'm nice to people. I try to reach them at their level and try to empathize with them and try to get them to change in a way that I don't necessarily push them. I mean, we talk about it as being assertive, but I'm trying to be assertive and more on the passive side rather than the aggressive side. But I have myself lately been questioning, and I think I mentioned it before also, whether being a bit more aggressive is not necessarily the worst thing that you can do, even if it can come a bit as disingenuous, because it can happen that what I nowadays do is that if I notice that a person is probably they'll never become vegan again, then like for me, I start with if there's a line where this is passive, this is aggressive, and I'm within this spectrum where it's assertive, I start with the passive. And if this person comes with more and more excuses, I slowly go more and more towards aggressive. And yeah, and it happens that if the person I realize that this person is never gonna understand this message properly, or they're just gonna come with excuses, or they're just gonna be trolling. Well, actually, if they're trolling, I just become passive because I can detect trolling, let's say, hopefully. But if this person is just not getting it, then I think, like, sometimes I think, would aggressiveness be a bit better for them? Would maybe disrupting their day, ruining their day a bit, be at least better, because it would get them to think a bit, it would get them to talk about that thing a bit? You see what I mean? Like, I don't know about this. That's what I've been questioning lately, and that's kind of why I end up in these situations where I'm like, why am I a bit aggressive? Because I'm questioning it, whether that would work or not. What's your take on this?
I think sometimes you got to wait people out. So you don't want to waste your time. So with someone who's obviously trolling, but you can kind of kill them with kindness sometimes, because I did this recently where, like, some people they were coming in really aggressive, and I just kind of stood my ground and kept answering their questions, and then kept asking them questions. And, like, I wasn't doing it in an asshole-ish way. You know what I mean? I was at least trying not to interrupt them, and I wasn't telling them what they thought. I was still asking them questions the whole time. And they eventually broke. Like, they came in super, super hot, and eventually they kind of, like, they calmed down a bit. And I think we even shook hands at the end of it, because at the end they respected me at the end of it. And I think they respected me because they didn't get to me in a way. And also, we both started hot, and then we both came down. You know what I mean? So, like, I think in the conversation, there's two people, right? And so the frame of that conversation is what both of you make it. And if they're coming in with this frame of, like, this is aggressive, and then you go, well, I'm going to get aggressive. And they go, well, I can get a little more aggressive. And then you go, you're talking faster, you're talking louder, you're interrupting more, and it just keeps escalating. But if they go, I'm going to go like this, and you go, I'm going to go like that. And they go, I'm going to go like this. And you're like, nope, staying here. And they go, I'm going to go like this. And you're like, nope, staying here. If there's a group of people, the frame of the conversation tends to shift to what the group does. But if it's just you two, and you're really good at holding your ground, eventually they keep going, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And then they go, okay, well, maybe I'll come down a little. 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 And they can come back down to where you are, because that's where you want them. You want them in a space of being open to listening, in a space that's calm, that's not defensive. And by staying there, I think you can bring them back down a lot of times, even when you think this person is totally full of shit. However, it takes a while. And so the question is, what's the opportunity cost of doing that? I think, as people who do activism a lot, you actually should try to do it, because I think it shows you something very interesting about human nature, and I think it also shows you something interesting about what you can do and what you're capable of. Because it's not just, we want to win the war, not the battle. And so sometimes you have to think, like, guess what? This is not a conversation that I'm going to convince this person to go vegan. This is a conversation where I learn something really valuable that I can't learn from the easy conversations. This is a conversation that makes me a better activist that I didn't have the opportunity. And if you start getting in that mode and having, like, gratitude towards that, you can actually really enjoy it. You say, like, hey, actually, you know what? I'm really happy. I just had 3 really easy interactions with, like, thoughtful people. Thank you, universe, for giving me this tough interaction and giving me this opportunity to grow, because ultimately I want to be the best activist I can be. And if I just keep having the same interactions all the time, that might be good, but I'm not going to be the best activist. I'm not going to be that like at the tip of the mountain. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think getting, maybe exercising some gratitude, reframing the situation in your own mind, and then controlling the frame of the conversation to just say, hey, this is a calm conversation where we ask questions and we explore. You're going to get mad, and I'm just going to keep saying, nope, I do not accept this frame of the conversation. The frame I am in is that we're calm asking questions, not that we're getting heated, you know? And if you can do that, you can bring many people back down. And I'll tell you one other thing. Recently, for Dr. Faraz Harsini, I assume, maybe you know him, I'm not sure.
I know.
I
don't know him personally.
Okay.
I follow him. Yeah.
I've been promoting him. Hopefully I'll release a video about him tomorrow or Friday. But he was having a conversation. We were at UPenn, and this guy was a farmer, and like it was just like it was like really heated, and I could just tell it was not going well. And then all of a sudden, like it broke and it started to go well. And he finished and he came over, and I was like, oh, what happened? And he was like, look, that guy was he was joking around. He was trolling basically. He was kind of making jokes. And at some point I just stepped back and said, hey, look, man, I'm here to have a serious conversation. Like what's happening to animals isn't funny to me. So like we can have a serious conversation, but if you don't want to have a serious conversation, then I'm just going to step away from this. And again, that's not aggressive. It's not passive. In fact, it is like the epitome of assertive. He said, here's my boundary. Here's what we're doing. Here's what this conversation looks like if you want to have it. And you know what happened? The guy chilled out. He said, okay, fine. And then they had a good, productive conversation. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
And so like, again, we get stuck in the loop of the conversation, and we forget that there are no rules, right? You don't have to keep playing checkers with them. You can turn the table over. You can start playing chess. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I think it's easy to get stuck in these patterns, especially because, if you do a lot of activism, you kind of have the same conversation over and over again.
Yeah.
But you gotta play jazz. You gotta mix it up, because that's where the most learning comes from. I mean, like even going to UPenn, I learned all sorts of little things that I didn't know before. And it's because I was being more risky. I was just throwing stuff out there and seeing like what hit, you know what I mean? What stuck to the wall. So yeah, I think, cause that's what I was going to say about this video that I was watching recently with you, and you and that guy were doing that. And I noticed like you started interrupting him, and you started, I think, almost telling him what you thought. You're like, no, you don't believe that. You think this. And it's like, and then so he started getting defensive, right? And it just like started escalating. And I was like, I thought what was interesting about that conversation is, to me watching it, I think you could have brought that one back down. There's ones I've watched, and there's people I've talked to who I thought, I'm like, this person is off the rails, or they're like very sociopathic, or there's just something that's not quite right. Like I don't think there's any way bringing this person back. But I think you could have brought that guy back. And that's why I think that would be an interesting conversation to like analyze, because I could see it. I was like, okay, it's heating up. I'm like, ooh, Chip just interrupted him. Ooh, he interrupted him again. Ooh, this guy said, he told him what he believed. He didn't ask him what he believed. And that one also had the detriment of the fact that I believe that was his girlfriend with him, I assume.
Yeah.
And she was like siding with you more so.
I did not notice that in the moment, but yeah.
And so then he was definitely feeling attacked. He's like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
This dude is telling me that I'm a bad person, and my girlfriend's agreeing with this random dude, I think too, like, just to point out, like, I don't know what I'm sure this dynamic is everywhere, but also you're like a jacked dude, right? Telling this guy what's what, and his girlfriend's agreeing with you. And so it's like, man, this is a tough one to pull back, because obviously I think dudes do start getting like intimidated, or like they got to chest up and be like, what's up, bro? You know what I mean? I'm sure you've noticed this, just like I've noticed this just being at the level of muscle I have, that dudes will sometimes get like defensive with you over nothing, like just the fact that you lift. I've had dudes come up to me, especially in college, and like I'm just like lifting at the gym, and there's like a guy I know from class, and I'm like, oh, hey, what's up, man? And he just comes up, he's like, you just got mirror muscles, bro. He's like, those muscles are all show. You're not actually strong. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, okay. Like, wasn't talking about that at all. I wasn't coming at you. I just said like, hey, how are you doing? And I've gotten stuff like that a lot over the years. More from younger guys, of course. But I think that definitely operates. And so like if you're going out there looking jacked, especially if you wear like a sleeveless shirt. I don't know if you've ever tried to do activism in a sleeveless shirt.
I'm about to. I want to do that next week, because it's going to be really hot, and I want to wear a tank top where I'll just look very muscly in that sense. Yeah.
Tell me how that goes. What I have noticed is when if I'm by myself in a tank top, far fewer women come up to me. I get
Mm.
way less interviews from women, and I feel like when guys come up to me, they're more defensive. Like just
so
immediately.
it's,
This might
so,
be me
so it's,
imagining it. This might be me imagining it. It might just be like all, just random statistics just happen to be when I went out. But yeah, I've noticed that there's definitely been a difference in what happens whenever I go in a sleeveless shirt versus just like a t-shirt.
I've been thinking about that myself, and that's why I haven't done it yet, because I'm curious if that's what will happen, and I'll test it out. Maybe that will happen or that won't happen. But you mentioned that video, where so there's two things that happened in that video. One is that I was in this phase where I'm like, you know what? Let's see if riling up works, if it's better or not. And the other thing that was happening is that these fucking buskers, man. Oh, they they consume me. If you sit there for the thing is that corner is the absolute best corner you can be sitting in that whole square, because you sit in this corner and there's people passing by like this, people passing by like there's just so many people passing by, and all of them are interested in museums, all of them are interested in like oh, let's walk around, they have some time. So the people there are basically the best people to outreach, because they're people who are somewhat are at least intelligent enough because they want to go to museums,
That's cool.
are they're kind of open-minded enough that they want to learn something new, and so it's a perfect corner to be there. The problem is that right in front of where I usually sit, there's now, especially lately, there's a busker that keeps coming, and they play this fucking accordion that goes, and you don't hear it in the video because I really do voice isolation a lot and I really work on it to not hear it, but it's so freaking loud. And there's days when I'm tired and the weather is nice, so I do it because the weather is nice. I still go outside and do activism because I have to take advantage of the weather. And I go out there and there's these people who come up and they're like so freaking noisy and so difficult that it's sometimes hard to focus on what the other person is saying. So I remember
Yeah.
before that conversation, I actually had a conversation and I was like, I'm sorry, I don't know. I just lost it. I just mid
Oh,
conversation, good
interesting.
conversation, I just lost it because of these freaking loud music playing in my ears. And yeah, so when that person came to me, I was like, okay, this conversation is going to be different. I'm going to focus. And I tried focusing, but as I was focusing, I was also realizing that I wasn't letting the other person speak. So it just became a whole thing. But yeah, whatever.
Yeah, that sounds frustrating. That definitely
It
sounds.
is. Yeah.
I was at University of Pennsylvania while some of the protests were going on, and like
Yeah.
the first 3 days they were very generally quiet, and like the fourth day we got there was like a counter protest that came up, and they were so loud. It was like deafening, like you could barely talk, and it was really frustrating. I just noticed my anger going up because I'm like, man, I can't hear anything, So I can imagine that sounds really frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It is. So nowadays I go different places, and I found a couple of new places where there's a lot of people. But wouldn't you know it? There's different buskers there, but at least one of them is nice. Like I go to a corner where there's a guy who comes with a piano and he plays really nice music, and he's a bit further away, so it's okay. It's good enough. Um, so I know we reached a 2 hour limit.
Yeah.
We gone really into it, and I don't want to stay too long because it's late for me. I don't want to keep
Yeah,
you too
yeah.
long, and I'm also thinking maybe we do this again sometimes because I have so many other questions that we didn't get to touch upon, but we can discuss that. I wanted to ask you because a couple more questions, not many, and then let's just touch upon them a little bit, because I would hate it if we didn't discuss those, because I don't know, I just feel like they were such an integral part of what we discussed so far. So um, I noticed also that in your conversation with Danish, the reason why you put these clues on the video that you say kind of what you're thinking, and what when you do the outreach, kind of what the reason for why you ask them this way and why you behave this way is because they're more tailored towards the vegan activists, right? So then in that sense, I know that the majority of your audience, just like the majority of my audience, are probably vegans or vegan activists. However, when we do these street outreaches, the reason why I think they're so effective is because they should outreach non-vegan people, right? So in that sense, given what we discussed so far, disruptive activism, our approaches, being more aggressive, being less aggressive, how do you feel we should, or what is it that we should be doing to try and make these videos more reachable by the non-vegans? And I don't mean now the thumbnails. Let's assume that the non-vegan person goes into the video, clicked on the title and the thumbnail, whatever you chose that to be. But from that point on, keeping them engaged, how do you feel? What is it that a conversation should do to keep them? Because I feel like it will be valuable information regardless for them.
Well, in some sense, I don't know. It seems like the conversations that go the most viral are the ones that are a little more heated. And so I think that's part of the reason I've kind of tailored mine more towards activists, because I think most of mine are less heated. And because there's already so many videos out there of more heated discussions. So I was trying to kind of occupy a niche that wasn't super occupied before, so an underserved niche. And so I think it's great that there's ones that are more heated and that draw people outside of the vegan community in. The thing that's interesting is that I think, like, in an actual conversation, one-on-one conversation, no camera, I think generally, like, it can get a little heated, that's fine. But these blowouts, I don't think those are going to be as effective as having one of these more, like, compassionate but assertive, but, like, you know,
sure,
I don't know, maybe tough love, or I don't know what you want to call it. Not tough love. I would say more like just an assertive, sort of honest conversation, I would say. Like an assertive, honest, frank conversation. I think those are what it's probably going to be the most powerful for the individual. The more heated conversations, I think, are going to get wider reach. And of course, they're going to keep the non-vegan watching more, I would say. And I think for those, I think the thing that's important for non-vegans to see is a bunch of arguments getting dismantled. Because, you know, if a lot of times when I'm doing my outreach, I'm like asking the person, like, what would be stopping you? And so they gave me their specific objections, and then I can, like, answer those objections, right, in the moment. But if a wide audience is watching, there's going to be a wide variety of objections that they have. And so if you're talking to someone who's super defensive, they're going to break out every possible objection, which means you're going to get a chance in an entertaining way to show that none of these arguments make any sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I imagine that's
true.
Probably pretty powerful to the non-vegan. But yeah, I don't know how to get my stuff to, like, I mean, I do know, because the conversations I have that don't go as swimmingly often are the ones that get more views, you know. When there is a little more heat to them, those tend to get more views and even more subscribers often.
Yeah, it's true.
But the ones that go well, the comments tend to be better. And the ones that go well, I also tend to get more patrons from those. So
then, given the climate of outreach videos, which, you know, I know there's a lot of outreach videos out there, right? And there will be more outreach videos being put out there. The question is, should we try to tailor these outreach videos more towards non-vegans, or should we try to tailor more towards vegan activism, where, in that sense, I mean, I'm sure that the solution is probably both, but, like, if you were to say which one should we do more, I guess, should we more try to get these heated conversations where we get more people, non-vegans, in there, where as you say, we debunk a lot of the things that they claim, a lot of arguments that they claim? Or should we just show people how to do outreach on the street? Because, as you pointed, right, like, the best outreach, when you do outreach on the street, is to be calm and present and talk nicely to people and have conversations. That's what would get one person to be vegan. But when you're with a camera, the goal is slightly different, isn't it? So that's kind of what I'm questioning also.
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably, like, again, like, this is just goes back to this idea of an ecosystem of activism, because what I would want to happen is the people to get drawn in by one of these more heated debates and
Yeah.
then get shown similar videos of debates where the vegan is being more calm, right? And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, vegans
It's a
aren't
good one, yeah.
unhinged. You know what I mean? I think probably, given that, you probably need more of the videos that are more heated and are that breaking down every claim, right? We don't need a ton of people being like, hey, activists, this is how to get active. Though I think we do need some people doing that. And that's just one thing I'm trying to do. You know, especially because there are so many videos, and like I think a lot of the really big videos, well, I think this kind of
Yeah.
is a little bit like Joey's videos tend to be a little more heated, and Earthling Ed's tend to be a little more calm. Although there's crossover there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that both are important. And the thing is, there's already a broad volume of videos out there. You know what I mean? And so I think at this point we are trying to flood the market a bit. You know what I mean? And get people, because like maybe someone watches Ed or watches Joey and doesn't really resonate with them, or resonates with them a little bit, but then they're like, oh my god, like look at these big channels. And they're like, wait a second, there's like a bunch of people who have like 10,000 subscribers, 5,000 subscribers, 1,000 subscribers who are also doing this outreach. You know what I mean? And maybe
Yeah.
like also one tends to resonate more. Maybe like, I don't know, people are like, yeah, there's of course people in the UK, that's like, I guess like veganism's a UK thing. Well, hopefully they can see some American activists or it's Canadian activists or whatever, wherever you're from, you know what I mean? Whatever country in the world. So yeah, I think just having a really broad base, but probably the ones that are more heated and that are more like objection destroying are the ones that are going to catch people. And then hopefully we can funnel them to other activists who might match more with whatever particular psychosocial demographic they belong to.
I really like your answer, by the way. I never thought about it this way, but you're right. The ideal solution is to draw them in with the heated discussions, to have the arguments being explained or become heated, or the arguments being properly debunked. That's what I was going for. And then somehow direct them towards calmer videos, as you point. I like that a lot. So I'm gonna see if I can do that. I'm gonna see if I can do that in my future videos.
And the thing is that the more heated debates, that's just going to appeal to some people just on the face of it. They won't need to see the calmer debates. They'll just be like, yeah, convinced. You know,
That's true. That's true.
that's going to be some portion of people, like even like the Gary Yourofsky speech. You know, I know a lot of people like saw that speech and like went vegan right away.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, I guess that wasn't heated exactly. It was a different kind of thing than outreach, but definitely assertive, I would say. Definitely an assertive speech.
Okay.
So.
And I have one more questions about outreach, and then I have a couple of questions that I ask almost everybody towards the end of the thing. And because, as I said, I don't want to keep you too long, and I'm also it's like 1 a.m. for me, so it's my mind is, I know at some point my mind is gonna be like, bye. So given that what you just discussed now, I'm curious also. I know you have the really good video about debunking crop deaths, right?
Yes.
And by the way, one of the questions that I ask almost everybody at the end of when I have these interviews with people is ask them, what is your best argument about crop deaths? That's not something I will ask you, because you already have the best argument against crop deaths. But what I wanted to ask you right now is, do you think as a vegan channel, what is it that you want to do, and what is it, not just that what you want to do, but also what is it that you think we as other vegan activists, YouTubers, should do? Should we, so I asked you first whether heated or calm conversations, and we got this out of the way. And now I'm asking you, should we do outreach videos where we have conversations with people, or should we, and again, I probably know it's both, or should we do these videos where we debunk each individual claim and go more in depth on the reasons why and all of this? Like, I know there has to be obviously a healthy proportion of both, but my question is kind of, how do you see this proportion like happening?
Yeah, I mean, so just so everyone's clear here, this is all very speculative,
Yeah.
right? We don't have any empirical
Of
data
course,
on
of
this,
course,
so
of
I'm
course.
just
Yeah,
speculating.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's your opinion, right?
Yeah,
That's what I
yeah.
want to know. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I value right now.
I don't know. So I think probably those video essays, probably we need less of those video essays in the same way, because I think those video essays probably appeal to people less than the outreach. The thing about the
Yeah.
video essay, though, is that it really allows you to really dig in and like tear the guts out of the argument. You know what I mean? And it also allows you to like show a lot of sources, like so you can, throw up the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics or other dietetic organizations or studies or whatever it is that you need to throw up in that moment. And it also lets you go like deeper into the arguments, because oftentimes what works in outreach is oftentimes something that's a little bit more soundbitey in nature, but there are like further objections someone can make to our responses that we give in outreach. And I saw people doing that. They're like, they said this, they didn't even think about that. And it's like, yeah, because an outreach conversation is like 10 to 20 minutes and you don't know when it's going to end. And so like you have to be managing all these other things like time. And you also kind of want to be like, at times I think you want to be a little poetic with the people or even inspirational. You know what I mean? And so like not everything you say is a super airtight, logical version of that thing. Sometimes you do, but sometimes it's meant to be a little more motivating or to have this like poetic quality that like sticks in your mind, Not like persuasion isn't about like just like input, output, zeros and ones. And like, I have made the most logical proposition and blah, blah, you know what I mean? Or whatever.
Sure.
So people don't get convinced purely by like, just like good logic. And so I don't think we should be talking to people on the street using just that pure logic. But when you have a video essay, I think you can explore that more. And so you can dig in and give, I think, more logical arguments that have sources and things like that. And so while those won't be as entertaining, most people don't need the level of logic that is contained in those video essays. Most people don't need that. But there is a subset of people that do and really do want that level of analysis. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
if those people just watch street outreach, maybe they're not fully convinced, if they're not motivated to maybe connect some of the dots on their own. So those are there. Honestly, the reason I make a lot of those videos is to solidify and congeal my own ideas about these topics, because I want to explore them and figure out like, okay, what are all the relevant factors and what are all like the sort of counter arguments? Can I address those deeper counter arguments? And so a lot of times I make them for me so that I can then like rewatch them and be like, oh yeah, that was a good point that I made there. That was smart of me.
Good one.
And so I kind of make them in some ways for myself, just so I can be like really tight on the philosophy or the way I see the philosophy. So, and again, like that's what I'm saying is like, even like, there's a sort of debate bro culture that's part and parcel of veganism. And
Yeah.
some of these really, really intense, like going down, getting like really nitpicky debates, right? Some people are convinced, some people aren't convinced until they have all of that. And so sometimes that's what you need. And so for me, because I think I had the facility to make those videos and make them at least somewhat entertaining, I felt like I should do that. Because I'm trying to not look at necessarily what is the best thing to do, but this cross section of what is the best thing to do combined with what am I good at, combined with what am I uniquely good at. You know what I mean? If I'm good at something that 90% of the population is good at, then me making a video about that is less valuable than if the thing I'm good at, only 5% of the population are good at. And so I think I had a particular facility with like bringing a logical argument, bringing some empirical data, and then making it look pretty. And I think while I'm not the best at any of those things, I think I'm like pretty decent at all of them in a way that most people aren't. And so that I could produce a pretty high quality product in the end, I guess. Product for us vegans to consume. Again, even those, I don't think most non-vegans are watching them. I think they're to sharpen vegans' own points.
I see your point. Yeah, I agree with you. That's a very good way of putting it. So what I got from this is that we shouldn't be making these, you call them video essays, I wrote that down, necessarily just to put up more content out there. but rather to, if we have a different perspective, a better perspective, to then create these video essays. Otherwise, outreach would be preferable or better, right?
Yeah, and actually something I just thought of, someone who does this really well actually, who merges these two, is Lifting Vegan Logic, because what he does is he picks some like popular person or some like polemicist of some sort, like Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan says something stupid, and then he goes in and is like, Piers Morgan said what? And then he proceeds to just give like the generic vegan debunks. And Lifting Vegan Logic, a lot of his videos are like, a lot of videos like that, he's just rehashing the same anti-vegan nonsense and then debunking the argument, but he's bringing people in who are like, Piers Morgan said what, you know what I mean? So he's bringing in that broader audience and then providing them with that argument, but in a context that's like very consumable. And I've done that some, and I probably will do that more as a means to grow my channel. But I also do just like making these videos that go really, really deep and explain like some more complicated things to vegans that are not, you can find elsewhere, but you'd have to listen to very long debates or read very long things. And so I'm trying to bridge that gap for these vegans who may not be full on debate pro, but kind of want a little bit more of a digestible version of these more complex arguments. So like, you know, for instance, I have a script written about hunting deer, you know, and this comes from a more utilitarian angle, but it's like, you know, oh, well, if I just ate deers, then I would kill less than you kill for your vegetables. A claim that I think is pretty much absurd, actually. But a lot of people, including vegans, seem to think it makes sense. They're like, yeah, okay, but it's really about not objectifying animals, not violating their rights, not et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not even convinced that less animals are killed, and I'm certainly not convinced that it's more environmentally friendly, like people say it is. And so I have a whole script written on that about why I think that claim is like kind of absurd. I just don't feel like making it right now because I don't feel like doing it. But that's like an example of another thing that I just have not seen anyone really go super deep on the numbers on. And there's also just some like, there's just some conceptual things that I think a lot of people don't understand. And like, if you actually understand some of these underlying concepts, you can kind of quickly pick out why a lot of this stuff is just like, doesn't make sense. So yeah, so that's one like I've got in the chamber. I've got a couple I want to write about slavery. What else? Yeah, there's two I want to do about slavery. One about the psychology of slavery, and then the deer one, and then also one that more directly just compares slavery and like the history of it. So, but yeah, I don't know. I just don't feel like making any video essays right now. I think I'm gonna keep going on the outreach for a bit. So.
I agree. It's a bit easier to do outreach than to make video essays. It's, I agree with you on that one. And the way I see these video essays is that a lot of these topics have a bit of information here, a bit of information there, a bit of information there, a bit of information there, and we all use some parts of this information during outreach. But these video essays kind of just take it all in. And, you know, a lot of the times we use these informations and it happens that you hear them from another vegan activist, you hear them in another video, but you don't see the actual studies behind them, or you never have to actually look them up perfectly. So you're like, yeah, sounds logical, I'll use it. Seems like that would be true. But what these video essays do, I feel like they consecrate all of this information into one, and then you can like, okay, that's good. They create a baseline for the information, I feel like. So when you did this thing with the crop deaths, that's what they did. That's what it did for me in my head. It's like, okay, this is what crop deaths, this is a good argument against crop death. I can take anything from here that I want, and I trust it. See what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy you trust it. That's good. Yeah. That is good. That's interesting to know, because I'm never quite sure exactly how people view or use those videos. I just know that like lots of people watch them or like them or whatever. But it's different than just quantitatively knowing a lot of people like this to qualitatively knowing like what was it that they found valuable in it.
I think that also it depends on your goal. I think that if you need a bit of incentives to do these videos, there's one thing, as I said, like that we trust this video because you put so much effort into it, and they become so well versed and with backed up by information, and they're like, okay, I'm going to trust this video. But then another thing that comes out of it is that you gain more trust in the information that you provide as yourself, right? Whereas with outreach, you are already a very trustworthy person, I would say, even when you do outreach, because you provide all this information on the screen and everything. But I feel like with these videos, you solidify your role even more when you see it's not just about how I do outreach, it's also about the information behind it. It's also about this, and that's kind of how I see it, at least in my head. I don't know if it's true for everybody seeing it this way.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's important to like rationality rules, for instance, was kind of putting forth some arguments against veganism somewhat recently with Lifting Vegan Logic. Or some people told me like he wasn't putting forth arguments, he was just asking questions, which is an interesting take, because that is technically what he was doing. But yeah, sometimes we have to read between the lines with these things. And he was putting out what could be, and part of the reason it's funny is because like someone like Alex O'Connor or Rationality Rules will put out one of those videos, right? And then I'll get people telling me he didn't make an argument, like he wasn't making this argument. I'm like, look, even if he wasn't, that's fine. I'm still going to respond to this argument that I think he could be making, or that people will take from this. And then people will be like, no, he wasn't making this argument. And then the next day on like Debate a Vegan on Reddit, like his exact argument is regurgitated on there. And the person is presenting it as if they just thought of it. They're like, here's something I was thinking about the other day. And then they basically just like present his argument that he wasn't really arguing, that he was just asking a question of. And so I think it is important too, when these like bigger figures do present an argument that's like more novel, that we come in and can actually like debunk it or address it at the very least. He was coming with the vegan bodybuilders versus vegetarians.
Yeah, that's stupid.
And the thing is that like I hadn't heard that. So I had heard a version of that argument before, but I hadn't heard it expressed on such a large platform to such a large group of people. And it's not obvious, I think, to most non-vegans, like what the issue is. I don't even think it's obvious to many vegans, like how to debunk that properly or how to address it, because it starts getting into this weird thing of like, what exactly is your normative framework, and how different normative frameworks are going to see things. Different normative frameworks are going to see things slightly differently on the edges. Like at the margins is when stuff is going to get a little weird. I think almost every normative framework, like I don't see how most of the main, like the big three normative ethical frameworks, they can't abide torturing, murdering, exploiting, killing, and eating animals. like it just doesn't, like if you bring animals into your circle of moral concern, like this behavior doesn't make sense. But depending on the particular normative framework, like you can get these weird little divergences, whenever you start getting into these more corner cases or whatever. And so like that was another one recently where I was pretty much done video essays, and I was like, fuck, I got to make one on this because I do need to address what exactly is going on here. And so like, because Lifting Vegan Logic answered it in his own way when Stephen was asking him, but I felt like it didn't cover necessarily all the normative bases that there were to cover. And so I wanted to give a little bit more of like a complete answering of that specific question. And so hopefully that gave people, because different people are like, if different people are coming from different normative frameworks, like Lifting Vegan Logic's answer might not actually resonate with them. They might not agree with his answer, or it's just not the normative framework they're coming from, so it doesn't work for them. So they're like, well, if I was, a threshold deontologist who believed in minimizing rights violations, then yes, maybe this would make sense. But because I'm not a threshold deontologist who's interested in minimizing rights violations, then I don't know that this does make sense, or this isn't the argument I would use. So like, what would I say? And so I was kind of trying to provide arguments from different perspectives. But I was trying to come from Stephen's perspective, which seems mostly like a utilitarian argument.
Yeah, it does.
So another thing to just, I want to try to address people's arguments based on their own framework when I can. At some point that might become, it could become unfeasible. It might not be feasible at some point to do that, and at which point you got to like argue your normative ethics, which is typically a near
Yeah.
impossibility. Like to just talk
Yeah.
like it's like if someone's like a Christian and you're like your divine command theory, I don't agree with it. You should be a utilitarian or a deontologist or a virtue ethicist. Like that's a hard sell. So like I think we got to generally try to work within their own normative frameworks. And so with that one, I was trying to work with what I think is he seems like a utilitarian largely. I don't know if maybe he describes himself as like
Alex?
a partial
Yeah.
deontologist. No,
Alex
this is
seems like-
this is Rationality Rules. I don't. Do you know him?
Oh.
So that's Alex's
don't.
friend. Okay.
Oh, I don't know Rationality Rules. No, I'll
Yeah,
write
yeah,
him
so-
down.
He's Alex's friend. He's a vegetarian, but he's like very much flirting with veganism. But yeah, so yeah, I try to meet people where they are and with the exact argument that they're using, because it's always better if you can, defeat them on their own terms than if you introduce completely new foundational ethics to the situation.
I completely agree with that. Yeah. I forgot where we started with the question. Oh, the question was about the videos. Which kind of videos make sense? Yeah. Yeah.
Dude, I think people in your chat are still arguing about the horse thing, man.
I know. That's why I'm letting them do their thing. Just stop arguing, guys, in the chat. Just leave it alone. We'll make a. You know what, guys?
Yeah.
Just park it. Park the whole horse situation. Park the whole whatever situation, and we'll discuss it in another video. Let's not lose. This is a really nice discussion we're having. There's no point in arguing about something else right now. Okay, just park it. Nothing will get solved today. You fought enough. Just, yeah. Ellis says, yeah, hold your horses, everyone. Yeah, that's kind of funny.
There's an interesting thing that happens, I think, with these. This happens in any movement. Is that whenever there is this corner case, like the number of people riding horses to begin with is so minimal compared to like all the other sort of forms of exploitation, and then
It's
like,
true.
but the disproportionate amount of time that then gets like spent on talking about these issues within the community itself is like just the proportionality is way off. And it like I understand why it happens, and I actually even like these discussions, these really like sort of like
Same.
nitpicky philosophical ones. Like I enjoy them, but it is interesting to note just like it feels like there's an inverse correlation or a correlation between like how niche something is and how much time gets spent talking about it, right? Like the more niche it is, the more time that gets spent talking about it. Like should we shoot lions in the face or should we ride
Oh,
horses?
I actually had the whole culling predators discussion with Vegan Gains. I went on his live channel today, and I had the whole
Nice.
conversation. And I didn't mention it, but that it's not about veganism, but rather just another topic that, as you mentioned it, like an edge case scenario where we discuss it. And I thought it was a good discussion. It was just a discussion. It didn't have to be a debate. It didn't have to be I'm right, you're wrong, or whatever. I was just, we were both kind of pointing at where is it that we're sitting at, and where is it that we disagree on. And I guess we reached the point where we realized where it is that we disagree on. But I don't want to get into that.
Yeah, don't spoil it.
Yeah, I
You
think,
got to leave something for the people to watch. Give them a teaser.
Exactly. So Justin, thank you for being here. I want to ask you a couple more questions, quick questions, nothing super serious. It's, as I said, the questions that I almost ask everyone at the end. And I really wanted to also ask you more about yourself, but we're really at 2 hours and a half, and so I don't want to make this too long. And I really hope that at some point we'll get to meet again and maybe even discuss some of these edge cases together, because I feel like we have a good rapport. Okay, so what is the one?
Play D&D instead. That sounds like more fun. Than
Yeah,
edge cases.
let's do that. Yeah, let's play D&D. Yes, that's a good one. Okay, what is the argument against veganism? The argument against veganism that you dislike the most?
That's a good question. I think when people say morality is subjective is probably my least favorite for all sorts of reasons. First off, I don't think people even know what they mean when they say that most of the time. because I feel like people
True.
mean like a couple different things when they say that. Also, it gets into like really sort of deep philosophical territory that like the average person saying this is not going to be able to like wade into. What it is, honestly, you know, I've said this before, is that it's basically a thought terminating cliche masquerading as profundity. It's like meant to sound like this super deep intellectual, you know, like unstoppable position. But all it is a thought terminating cliche. It's like saying it is what it is, or like it's a personal choice, right? It's like when you actually like probe them on it, it just doesn't go anywhere. It's basically just saying fuck off. I don't want to talk about this.
Exactly.
Because it seems like what most people mean is something more like morality is subjective. Basically, you can't tell me what to do, is what they seem to be meaning. I know that's not what morality is subjective actually means or means in the literature, but when the average person on the street says it to you, it's more in that vein, you know. And I think I said this on Danesh's podcast. The interesting thing about this is, you know, I've heard that throughout my life, and whenever I hear it, it's almost always when someone is doing something selfish, and they say morality is subjective. I've never seen someone donate to a charity or like rescue a kitten from a tree, and someone come up and be like, wow, that was awesome. Really good job, man. That was so cool you did that. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Morality is subjective. You can't say that that was a good thing that I did. You know what I mean? When has anyone ever said that? It's like, do you have
I would
an
say
example?
that I said that actually.
Oh,
I
that's
said
funny.
that at some point. Yeah. But I get it.
funny.
Yeah,
Um,
it's funny. It's funny.
So yeah, and again, like it's just like it's so silly because like if they feel like that's a good argument, then it's just like, okay, so like if we go back into the 1800s, I assume you're against slavery. If I was pro-slavery and I said, well, morality is just subjective, would you be like, checkmate, position defeated, I guess I'm pro-slavery now? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think, so I don't like it's a personal choice because of it's such as this like knee-jerk reaction. But the reason I don't like morality is subjective more is because it adds this layer of like superficial like profundity to it that just like adds like an extra layer of annoyance to me. I'm just like, fuck off, just shut up.
I completely agree with you. When people tell me that morality is subjective, I then try to say, okay, I try to acquire, like you said before, what morality do you follow? And you will see that not being vegan is probably not in line with your own moral values, not
with your own subjective
with your
moral
own
values.
subjective exactly, with your own subjective moral values. So yeah, it is a cop out usually, just like okay. And along the same lines, what is the logical fallacy that you hate the most?
Interesting. I think the one that annoys me the most is probably a nirvana fallacy.
That is a very annoying one, it's true.
Yeah, the nirvana fallacy is probably the most annoying to me. The most interesting fallacy, though, and the one that I think a lot of people have problems arguing against, is the fallacy of the beard, or the continuum fallacy.
Which one
fallacy.
Is that?
Yeah. So, have you heard of a Sorites paradox? This is
No.
Okay. So the Sorites paradox is like, imagine I have like a little pile of sand, or sometimes people do it with a puddle of water. And you know, there's 3 drops on the ground. Do you think 3 drops is a puddle? No. Okay. What about 4 drops? Okay. And then you go over and you have like a puddle on the ground. You're like, okay, but that's a puddle. You're like, yes. And you're like, okay, well, how many drops is it till it's a puddle? And at any point, you can like look at it and say like, okay, where you're like, okay, that's definitely a puddle. And then you're like, well, if I take 1 drop out, you're telling me that's not a puddle. And I take 1 drop out and you're like, that still does look like a puddle. And you're like, okay, so this is the actual point at which it's a puddle. Like, yeah. And you're like, okay, well, so if I take a single drop out, again, that's still a puddle, you know? And it gets to be like, so that's a Sorites paradox, which is like basically this paradox of like, I guess sort of that it can be a puddle and not be a puddle, but like, how is it a puddle if that's the minimum of a puddle, but taking out 1 drop still keeps it a puddle? How can this be the case? The fallacy of the beard, or a continuum fallacy, is sort of similar to this, and it's basically the idea that because we can't explicitly state a specific border between these two states or between these two categorizations, therefore no distinction can be made. And I actually did run into a guy who was arguing this, and they're arguing it with sentience. So they're basically saying like, well, at what point is an animal sentient? And I was like, well, it's a fuzzy border. We don't know. He's like, well, if you don't know, then we can't say that a rock isn't sentient. You know what I mean? You have to say that you have the same credence that a rock is sentient as this. And I'm like, no, dude, that's literally a continuum fallacy. It is not the case that we have to say that. And the example I used with him is voting age. So with voting age, you think, okay, what age should you be able to vote? In the United States, it's 18. I know it differs places, right? But let's say we've agreed on 18 as the age to vote. Cool. Okay. So then I can do it with this, right? So I can say, okay, so are you really telling me that someone who's 17 years, 364 days old, 23 hours, 59 minutes, that person does not have the cognitive capacity to vote? You're telling me that? Well, no. Okay, yeah. If it was 1 second, they would have the. Okay, so what if I took 2 seconds away? What if I took 3 seconds?
That's a good way to debunk it. Yeah.
So like, they could still vote, right? And they're like, okay, yeah, I guess they could still vote. And I'm like, okay, but that doesn't mean, just because we don't have an exact thing, that doesn't mean that there should be no voting age, does it? Like, does that mean a 3-year-old should be able to vote? Or that we shouldn't give someone the right to vote until they were 53? Of course not. Just because the border is fuzzy doesn't mean we can't say anything about different points on that spectrum. And so that's the continuum fallacy, also called the fallacy of the beard, because it comes from the fact that the same thing with a beard. Like, how many hairs can you take away before it's like not a beard anymore? Like you're towing the line. I don't know. I'm sure.
I like how you put it. It's basically what you're saying is that just because there is no line doesn't mean we can't draw a line, right? And that's kind of where you're going at.
Yeah. That we can't say certain things. Like if we have a spectrum, we can clearly say things about points on that spectrum without having to know the exact point at which that thing flips from like acceptable to unacceptable, or a puddle to not a puddle, or sentience to not sentience. Just because we don't know that exact thing and that borders are fuzzy, doesn't mean that we can't say things about objects on either side of that spectrum or on the farther sides of the spectrum.
Can you tell me the name of the fallacy again? I'll look it up to read more about it. It's very interesting.
Sure. Yeah, it's got like 6 names. One is fallacy of the beard. One is continuum fallacy. I think there's like 5 other. There's not 5 other names. There's more other names for it.
Glorious beard, by the way. You have a very nice beard. That's
thank you.
It almost looks glued on. It's so
I just got my hair cut today. My barber gave me some real sharp lines. So actually, it wasn't this big before. I was more chin strappy, and he convinced me to grow it out. And I'm like, dude, I can't grow it out. It's all patchy. And he's like, you're just going to have to deal with it being patchy for a while. So this took me probably a month and a half to get it to this level. And it was all like nasty looking for a while.
A month and a half is nothing. After a month and a half, I'm like,
oh, really?
A little bit more than I am now. Like just,
Nice.
Yeah, it's so genetics. Okay. So this was the fallacy that you hate the most. And my next question is, if you can eliminate one fallacy off the face of Earth forever, which one would you do? Would you eliminate? Like nobody will ever commit this fallacy again.
Oh, the appeal to nature fallacy.
Me too.
Like not even close, because the appeal to nature fallacy is so pervasive and problematic and like pernicious. It is, because it doesn't just apply to veganism. It applies to everything. There's so many things in like, as far as diet, health, and even like environment and stuff like that. It's just like, it is so pervasive and so problematic. I hate it. I hate it so much.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you. I think it's such a fucked up fallacy. It's just, can you just stop it with it? Just stop it. Yeah. Okay.
And it's like, I understand the emotional pull of the fallacy, because like I feel that emotional pull myself. But yeah, it's one that we have to train out of people. It should be taught in kindergarten, then again in first grade, then again in second grade, then again in third grade, and it should be taught at every level all the time in school. It has to just be drilled into you what an appeal to nature fallacy is, because it's easy to forget. Even when you know it, even when people know the fallacy, they still commit it. I see vegans who are so familiar with the appeal to nature fallacy, then go and commit the appeal to nature fallacy in other contexts. Like, with no awareness of it. It's just like, that's just the sort of grip that fallacy has on our minds. So bad. So bad.
Yeah, I hate it so much that even if I find a person who I really respect, why they see such great stuff every time, and then they appeal to nature, I'm like, instantly comment, have to correct them. I have to tell them. I think it's one of those things that, as you pointed out, it's so ingrained in our thinking and that we gotta acknowledge it and maybe try to get rid of it.
Yeah, it's really tough. It's really tough.
Okay, and I have two more questions, and then if you could make one person, any person in this world, vegan, it could be a family member, it could be a friend, or it could be a personality, who would you choose to make vegan? Like, you just press this button and the person becomes vegan.
Do I know that they're not going to go ex-vegan?
Yes.
Okay. It would have to be some sort of political leader then, in that case, just because they have the highest chance of like changing laws and affecting people around them.
Interesting.
So, I mean, I guess it's very U.S. centric. I guess at this point, maybe Biden, because he's the president of the U.S. It's like really a lot of power. The election's coming up and he is old, so it kind of makes me like almost want to pick someone younger who could be around longer. But I think I would probably pick Biden just because, or actually, you know what? No. I don't think I would pick Biden. Maybe I would. Maybe that would be a good choice. I think at this point, Joe Rogan might actually be the person to pick.
Oh,
because he has such a grip on culture, and he also has the ear of the people who are most hostile to our position, and moving that number of hostile people to just even neutral, I think would be such a boon to creating systemic change and getting people more on board with like changing laws and things like that. So maybe Joe Rogan actually. Yeah. Feels like a weird choice, but also, because then he would talk about it a lot too. That's the thing, is that it's not just that he would be vegan. You know, his ass would be like bringing it up all the time. And then he would also be instead of bringing these like carnivore, like doctors or whatever on, he would be bringing vegans on. So yeah, I think there'd probably be some really good positive feedback loops if we're in fantasy land, making whoever we want vegan.
I agree with you. For me, also, my first answer was Joe Rogan until somebody said Mr. Beast, and then I thought, okay, Mr. Beast is probably better because they have even more influence, I think. So, but
sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
My pushback against Mr. Beast though would be that Mr. Beast influence feels very like entertainment-y. And so like, I think if he went vegan, he wouldn't necessarily advocate hard for veganism. Whereas Joe Rogan feels more like he would be on there, like talking about it in like an argumentative way, in a way that like he would be laying out logical arguments and debunking stuff. So I don't know, because I guess
that's a good point.
Mr. Beast probably has more reach, technically. Yeah. But also people watch Mr. Beast videos and they're kind of fun and silly and whatever. Whereas like people listen to like hour-long podcasts or 2-hour-long podcasts on Joe Rogan, which is, I think, going to be maybe more beneficial to changing people's actual minds and behavior. But that's interesting. Mr. Beast is an interesting one. I also just wonder, there's probably also just people who have massive amounts of influence, but are just like not in the Western world, that I don't know them, you know?
Oh yeah, that's a very good point.
Like far more people. I just like don't know who this person is. Yeah.
I don't know who I heard recently. Somebody from India who's like has like millions of followers, and they're like, that he isn't even the biggest influencer in India. So like, okay, yeah, when you're in countries who have billions of people and you're doing it in a certain language that will appeal to a lot of millions of people, yeah, that's true. But I still think that culture is still somewhat, I don't necessarily agree with it happening this way, but it is that culture still kind of comes from Western countries, Europe or US.
I see. Yeah.
So I think like trends or anything along those lines are usually dictated by these. So what obviously veganism is not a trend, but getting people towards veganism is not necessarily a bad trend, right? Like getting
Yes.
people interested in veganism or not them becoming veganism as a trend. So yeah.
Yeah, that's
Hard to
probably
say.
true. That yeah, the West definitely exports our culture more than the other way around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Oh, and by that point, by the way, Mr. Beast I know touches also nowadays even more because he does it in Spanish and in other languages
Oh,
also.
interesting.
Yeah,
Okay, so he
yeah.
has an even
So
broader reach. Interesting.
he has an even broader reach. Yeah,
Interesting.
it's actually kind of, if you ask me, it's kind of sad that Mr. Beast is not vegan. It's very sad. Not just that he's not vegan, but rather that he's openly putting steaks in front of contestants or shit like that on TV. Like he can,
Oh.
like he can, well, on TV on his videos, he can not be vegan, but he should at least be responsible enough to not encourage non-veganism the way I see it. So
See, I don't even really know that much about this. I just know he's very big, but like I've watched like maybe
yeah,
3 of his videos, but I don't actually know much about him, which is interesting
yeah, it
given
was,
how big he is, and I'm like I still don't really like know much of his stuff.
yeah, I was the same until I really wanted to learn more about him because I'm like, I think I saw this one video of him where he's in a mall and he opens up this thing, I remember, and he opens up his, I think, Beast Burgers or whatever he opens up there. And there was just insane amount of people going crazy for him and being like, oh my God, like even worse than Hollywood stars and stuff. And I was like, I gotta learn who this person is. I'm like,
Yeah.
what the fuck? Like he's massive. And the more I looked into, the more I realized that just he's the Elon Musk of YouTube. He's, Elon Musk. I don't know how much you know about Elon Musk, but like,
Well, I know Elon Musk. I know who that is.
yeah, I know. What I found out from John Oliver's videos or John Oliver's in-depth information about Elon Musk is that basically the way Elon Musk reached success was try and fail, try and fail, try and fail, try and fail. That's all he did. Like he didn't necessarily believe in these ideas. He didn't necessarily think, oh, this is a better idea than the other. He didn't necessarily always calculate things. He just said trial and failure, trial and failure. And with this, he reached success, good amounts of success. And funny enough, Mr. Beast did exactly the same thing. If you watch his videos at the beginning, he said, well, I tried this worked. Tried this worked. And it seemed like people like this. And nowadays he still does the same thing. He does everything based on metrics. So I found, yeah, that's what I found out about him. I didn't find it particularly interesting about that, but I did find that it's interesting that you can do that and become one of the most famous people in the world for it. So
yeah, you definitely got to fail to get better. It's definitely a big part of learning. That's kind of, well, yeah, I guess
it
we were
is.
kind of talking about that earlier. Like, if you just go out and do the exact same type of activism all the time, you're not going to learn as much from like just taking a big risk and seeing like, oh, does X work? Does Y work? You know.
But I think like what I learned from Mr. Beast is also redrawing the line of failure. You see, so you know how when you post on YouTube, you get at which point of the chart that your video is, if it's the first based on your views, if it's going great, 1, 2, 3, 4.
I fucking hate that thing.
It's yeah. So he says that for him, if a video is not top 3, then it's a failure. If his next video is, yeah. So he redraw the line and he always tries different things and more. And maybe that is a recipe for success when you're doing whatever kind of videos, because you see he does whatever kind of videos.
Yep.
Doesn't necessarily work for our vegan activism, I think, but
yeah. We're definitely operating in a very restricted niche. You can still get big, but it's harder.
Much harder, yeah. And my final question: how do you envision a vegan world? You said 2070. Let's say it's the world 2070. What is it? What is something about this world that, let's say you somehow live in the world 2070 and you want to send a message to your current self or something, and you want to send only a message that describes something very specific in this world, what would you say? Like, I don't know. It's so interesting to go into a supermarket now that everything is vegan. It's so interesting. Everybody just there's no more butcheries, but now there's vegan deli shops. Or like, what is something that you envision from a vegan world? Or I don't know. I don't know if you got my question. I never know how to formulate this one perfectly, so
Well,
I'm just more curious. What are some factors that you find interesting in a vegan world?
To answer the question from like a time travel perspective there, I think I wouldn't tell myself something interesting and fun about the world. I would just be like, hey, this was the flashpoint that caused the world to go vegan. And these are the strategies that seem to really work. So I would just like feed information to myself from the future. Although if time worked like that, then I would have always been feeding myself information from the future and it wouldn't make any difference. But
we're reaching time paradoxes right here. I love it. Yeah.
What do I view in the future as something that'll be like very, I'm like, oh, thank fuck. Honestly, man, it's not like a specific like, oh, when I go to the store, I see this or that. It's actually just like me walking over to my friend's house or me going to get dinner with my friends and not worrying at all about having to coordinate a vegan dinner or them ordering a non-vegan dish or something. You know, I don't have to see one of them like chewing on bones when we're all going out and trying to hang out or something like that. You know, or even like the idea of like inconveniencing them by like forcing them to go to a vegan restaurant, right? Just that is just like no longer in my mind, right? Because it's like if we're talking like personally, what am I going to find the thing that I want the most relief from? It's this like social whatever. You know, this is like it's such a weird thing when people are like, vegans just are on their moral high horse, as they say, you know, ethically riding our high horses. And so like, it's so odd to me because like, I don't want that at all. I hate that I'm in the minority on veganism. I want everyone to go vegan tomorrow, you know?
I agree.
So yeah. And I mean, I want everyone to go vegan tomorrow, even totally for selfish reasons. Like I of course want them to go for the animals, but even if we were just talking selfish reasons, I want them to all go vegan tomorrow. So I don't have to deal with these conversations and like, you know, why aren't my friends seeing it? Like, why don't they fucking see it? You know, these people who I think are otherwise just good people and they are not getting this. Like, what is going on? You know, I imagine the same thing, like back in the day, like, you know, in the 1800s, if all of a sudden you're like, oh, holy shit, I've really connected with this. Slavery is wrong. We need to abolish this. And some of your friends are like, do we though? Like, I get that that's a personal choice for you, but like, I personally am not going to really advocate for that. But I respect your opinion. It's like, ooh, you know, and like, I just, the longer I'm vegan, the more this feels like that to me. You know, it didn't at first. It didn't when I first went vegan, and the longer I'm in it, the more the analogy to slavery just feels very on point. So even at the level of like my emotional engagement with other people.
Completely agree with you. And I also, as you said this, I realized that I never thought about it this way. But yeah, as I go out, you know, and I don't know how it is. I mean, I know how it is in US, and people are very sociable there also, which I kind of like about US, that people are so, you stand in line and people will start chatting with each other, and it's kind of nice. It's kind of fun. You know, it's a little bit of a pleasure that you get in life when you go out and you're alone and you're going to get coffee or whatever, and you end up having a silly whatever conversation with a stranger. But I realize that now, since being vegan, it's very hard to have these conversations because a lot of these conversations are around food, because food is such a big part of our life. And I think it's not always, but most of the conversations, because you don't want to talk politics, you don't want to talk this, so then you find this common ground. The common ground is usually that we all like to eat, and it's so difficult to find to have these conversations. So yeah, I find myself that because of that, I just interact less and less with strangers because of it. So I understand. That's a very good point that you mentioned. I didn't think about it that way. Thank you, Justin, for being here. I don't know if you planned on staying so long. I also didn't plan on staying so long. I remember in my head being like, don't go over 1 hour and a half.
Yeah. That was what I was thinking originally too. I always go over on these typically. I think just because I so rare to get to chat to other vegans, especially other vegan YouTubers. It's like a niche of a niche, you know. Well, vegans, then vegan activists, then vegan activist YouTubers. So yeah, it is. It's always interesting to sort of share ideas. Although I felt like obviously you were sort of more interviewing me, so I talked your ear off. I feel.
No, it was awesome. It was awesome. I have 3 pages of this written down on my notebook, so on my actual physical notebook. So I definitely got a lot of stuff from it. And that's what I like to do. I like to write the things down. And then also, by the way, I wrote down, you used the word vista, which I thought was very interesting.
It's a pretty word.
It's a pretty word indeed. So, now that you're here, I want to close up the stream. And I usually close up the stream by giving a nice message to all the vegans that have been listening and have been watching this, and try to incentivize them to go out there and do activism on their own. But I feel like it would be interesting if you are okay with it, if you want to give like a final message to people, maybe people who haven't done outreach yet and are maybe a bit afraid to go out there and do outreach. Do you maybe want to try and do that to them? Or if not, I can do that, of course. But I feel like it would be nice coming from you, since everybody follows you and they look up to you, and you're such an awesome activist. So.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, I mean, again, not to just like keep like beating this slavery analogy into the ground, but I do just think that it just generally works on many levels. And so what I think about now is, if I was living back in the late 1700s or 1800s, you know what I mean? And it came to my attention, I realized, I was like, wow, human slavery is really bad. And then, I started saying, okay, well, I don't want to participate in this more, so I'm not going to buy, goods made by enslaved people. Would that be enough? You know what I mean? If you were living in that time, would that be enough for you? Would you feel good about yourself that that's all you were doing? Or would you need to do more? Would you feel compelled to do more? Would you feel like it was a moral obligation to do more? And if you don't feel like that, think about it from the enslaved person's perspective. If you were the enslaved person, would you be fine with that, if that was all that people were doing? Or would you want every person who had that epiphany, who came to that realization, to be there fighting for you, fighting as hard as they could? And to me, when you think about it in that way, it just becomes so obvious that not only should we withdraw our participation as much as we can from the system, but that we should actively be fighting to dismantle it and educate people about it. And so not everything has to be street outreach. There's all different ways to get active. I actually have a video on about all the different ways to get active. Big ways to get active, small ways to get active. One thing to realize too is that not all activism has to be directly interfacing with the public or with a public official. Lots of activists need people to edit their videos or create posters for them or do graphic design or all sorts of things, or go work for a vegan organization and maybe you're just good at accounting. So do the accounting, but at a vegan organization, You have some unique skill. Vegans are people who run organizations or run YouTube channels or run something. They need all the skills that typical organizations and YouTube channels and people need. You have a skill that matches up with that you can use in the service of activism, even if it's less direct. So if you're sitting there thinking, I could never get active, or I don't have the time to get active, expand your definition of what activism means and the ways you could help, and think about it from the victim's perspective. Like, do you not have an extra 10 minutes, 20 minutes a week? You could post some reviews, you could post a Reddit thread, you could put some stickers, on packages of animal flesh at the grocery store. You could just answer a couple tweets on Twitter. There's like this thing for Twitter or X that just finds tweets that mention the word vegan, and it's like a copy paste thing. You can just like copy paste things right in there. Start small, and if you have the time, get bigger. But I'm guessing that you can do something. I'm guessing that you have an extra 5 minutes or an extra 10 minutes or an extra 15 minutes, you know. And if you think you don't, think about the victim's perspective, right? Think if you were in that position, then would you have an extra 5 or 15 or 10 minutes? Would you want someone, you think they could actually find that extra time? I think probably. So.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Justin. I don't think I could have said it as well as you did. So thank you so much for being here. I hope everybody, you hear his words, and I don't know, go subscribe to his channel, subscribe to my channel, like my video, go like all of his videos. Just go in there, do the activism, go like all of his videos, drop comments. That's also another form of activism. And yeah, stay active.
Awesome.